Sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who share your blood. Elena Hartwell learned that lesson the hard way at 37 years old, sitting in a leather chair that cost more than 3 months of her teaching salary, watching her siblings divide up their grandmother's estate like vultures picking at bones. But that morning started differently. It started with cold. The Honda's windows had frosted over during the night, turning the Walmart parking lot into a blur of sodium lights and delivery trucks. Elena woke at 5:30 to the familiar ache in her lower back, the one that came from sleeping in a driver's seat for the 207th night in a row. 7 months. They had been homeless for 7 months, and her body kept a precise count of every uncomfortable hour. Her neck had developed a permanent stiffness that no amount of stretching could release. Her hips ached from the angle of the reclined seat. Her feet were always cold because the Honda's heater had stopped working reliably somewhere around month 4. She turned carefully, checking the back seat. Sophie slept under 3 winter coats, her 9-year-old face peaceful in a way that broke Elena's heart every single morning. The girl had adapted to this life with a resilience that felt both miraculous and terribly wrong. No child should know how to sleep in a car. No child should wake up and immediately check if anyone had noticed them parked there overnight. No child should understand that the security guard's flashlight sweeping across the parking lot at 2 in the morning meant they needed to stay perfectly still, perfectly quiet, until the light moved on. But Sophie knew all of these things. She had learned them the way children learn everything. By watching, by adapting, by surviving. Elena's phone read 5:32. The store opened at 6. They had 28 minutes to look like they had just arrived for early shopping, not like they had spent another night in the lot. She reached for her wallet in the cup holder and counted. $23.47. The math was simple and brutal. $12 for gas to get to work and back for 3 days. That left $11.47 for food. Peanut butter sandwiches again. Maybe apples if they were on sale. If not, they would stretch the bread with water and hope Sophie did not notice. Elena remembered a time when she did not think about food this way. When groceries were something you bought without calculating every penny. When a trip to the store meant possibilities, not desperate arithmetic. That time felt like it belonged to someone else. Some other Elena who had a house and a husband and a life that made sense. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Elena almost ignored it, but at this hour, unknown numbers usually meant bad news or bill collectors. And she had learned that bad news did not improve with waiting. Better to face it head on. Better to know what new disaster was coming so she could start figuring out how to survive it. The voice on the other end was professionally gentle, the kind of tone lawyers practice for delivering information that would change lives. Frederick Patterson from Patterson and Associates. Her grandmother, Margaret Hartwell, had passed away 3 days ago. The funeral had been yesterday. The words hit Elena like physical blows. 3 days. Her grandmother had been dead for 3 days and no one had called. The funeral had happened and no one had told her. She had missed saying goodbye to the one person in her family who had ever truly seen her. Elena had missed it because she did not have gas money to drive to Denver from the suburb where she had been teaching. No one had called to tell her it was happening. No one had offered to help her get there. Derek with his millions. Caroline with her partner's salary. Neither of them had thought to pick up the phone. Or maybe they had thought about it. Maybe they had decided not to call. Maybe excluding Elena from the funeral was deliberate. The will would be read Monday morning at 10 o'clock. Elena's hands shook as she lowered the phone and pressed her forehead against the steering wheel, fighting the sob that threatened to escape. Her breath fogged in the cold air. Outside, the first delivery trucks were beginning to move through the parking lot, headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. Maggie had been the only family member who had called after Nathan left. The only one who had said, maybe this is not your fault, when the divorce lawyer explained that Elena's teaching salary meant she could not fight for the house. The only one who had not said, I told you so, when Elena admitted she was sleeping in her car. I wish I could help more, Maggie had said during their last phone call. I wish I could fix this for you. But you are stronger than you know, Elena. Stronger than any of them. You will find your way through this darkness. I believe in you. And Elena had not seen her in 8 months because gas costs money and pride costs more. 8 months of phone calls when they could get signal. 8 months of promises to visit soon, next month, when things got better. Things never got better. And now Maggie was gone. And Elena had not been there to hold her hand or say goodbye or tell her that those phone calls had meant everything, that hearing someone believe in her had kept Elena going when nothing else could. Sophie stirred in the back seat, her small voice cutting through the pre-dawn darkness with the kind of knowing that children of crisis develop too young. "Is it Grandma Maggie?" Elena turned, wiping her eyes before her daughter could see. But Sophie was already sitting up, already reading her mother's face with that terrible perceptiveness. 9 years old and already fluent in the language of adult pain. "The funeral was yesterday, baby. I am sorry. I did not know." Sophie's chin trembled, but she pressed her lips together. 9 years old and already practicing the art of swallowing grief so her mother would not crack. She had learned that from Elena, learned that crying used energy they could not afford to waste, learned that falling apart was a luxury for people with homes and heating and full refrigerators. Elena wanted to scream at the universe for teaching her daughter this skill. "There is a will reading on Monday. The lawyer says Grandma left instructions, specific things she wanted us to have." The hope that flickered in Sophie's eyes made Elena's chest tighten. She knew what her daughter was thinking, what Elena herself was thinking. Maybe enough for an apartment deposit, maybe enough for first and last month's rent, maybe enough to stop sleeping in parking lots and pretending this was an adventure. "We should get ready for school. Early bird catches the worm, right?" Sophie nodded and started folding the coats with practiced efficiency. They had a routine. Elena would walk Sophie to the Walmart bathroom, where they would wash up in the sink, brush teeth, change clothes from the plastic bins in the trunk, then McDonald's for dollar menu breakfast, if they could afford it, or the protein bars from the glove compartment if they could not. Today was a protein bar day. Elena watched her daughter fold each coat with military precision, maximizing trunk space, preparing for another day of pretending they were normal. Sophie should be thinking about homework and friends and whatever 9-year-olds thought about. Instead, she was thinking about which bathroom stall had the best privacy for changing clothes. The memory hit Elena without warning, sharp enough to steal breath. 6 months ago. Not even 6 months. Derek's voice on the phone when Elena had finally broken down and called her brother for help. "You made your choices, Elena. Teaching art to teenagers does not pay bills. I cannot enable poor life decisions." She had asked for $2,000, enough for an apartment deposit and 1 month's rent, enough to give Sophie a bedroom and a door that locked, enough to stop teaching her daughter that survival meant invisibility. Derek had a Tesla that cost more than Elena made in 2 years, a penthouse downtown with a view of the mountains, a watch collection worth more than most people's retirement accounts. But Elena's request for help had been enabling poor decisions. After the call ended, Elena had sat in her car for an hour, staring at the phone. Then she had opened her messages and seen the text Derek had accidentally sent to her instead of Caroline. She called asking for money. Pathetic. Just like Dad always said. Elena was always the weak one in the family. Elena had deleted this message. She had never mentioned it to Derek. Some wounds you carry silently because speaking them aloud would make them too real. Some betrayals you swallow because confronting them would destroy whatever thin thread still connected you to family. But she had not forgotten. She would never forget. The memory of Derek's words lived in her chest like a splinter too deep to remove. It surfaced every time she looked at Sophie sleeping in the back seat. Every time she counted coins for gas. Every time she smiled at a colleague and pretended everything was fine. She remembered Derek differently once, before their father died, before the money, before Derek had decided that wealth was the only measure of worth. Derek at 12 years old, standing at their father's funeral. Their father had died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving behind debts and disappointment and 3 children who would each process that loss differently. Their father had been a complicated man, charming when sober, cruel when drunk, full of promises he never kept and dreams he never pursued. He had told Derek he would come to his baseball games and never showed. He had told Caroline he would pay for her college and then spent the money on bad investments. He had told Elena she was talented and beautiful and then criticized everything she created. Maggie had spoken at the funeral. Elena remembered her grandmother's words clearly, even 25 years later. The church had been half empty. Their mother had been sedated with grief, and Maggie had stood at the pulpit and spoken the truth that no one else would say. "Your grandfather was a strong man, but he never kept his promises to me. Never. That is the one thing I will always hold against him. He said he would be there, and he was not. He said he would protect us, and he did not." Strength without reliability is just noise. Remember that. All of you. Derek had taken something from those words, but he had taken the wrong lesson. He had decided that strength meant wealth, success, independence from others. He had never understood that Maggie was talking about keeping your word, about being someone people could count on. Derek had built a $50 million company. He had proven that he did not need anyone. But when his sister needed $2,000 to keep her daughter off the street, he had failed the only test that mattered. The gym opened at 5:30 on weekdays. Elena had maintained her $29 membership for one reason only, and it was not fitness. The showers were clean and private and had hot water that did not run out after 5 minutes. $29 a month for the privilege of being clean. The privilege of showing up to work without smelling like a car. They arrived at 5:45, Elena carrying a backpack with their towels and clean clothes, Sophie holding her school uniform in a careful bundle. The teenager at the front desk barely looked up from her phone. Elena had learned to time their arrivals for when the disinterested employees were working, the ones who did not ask questions or make conversation. Elena and Sophie headed straight for the women's locker room where they had perfected the art of looking like they belonged. Quick showers. Efficient. Use only what you need, leave no trace. Elena stood under the spray and let herself have 30 seconds of something close to luxury, feeling the heat work into her perpetually tense shoulders. For 30 seconds, she could pretend this was normal, that she was just a woman getting ready for work, that she had a home to go back to and a life that made sense. Then the 30 seconds ended, and she was back to survival mode, counting minutes, calculating risks, planning the next 12 hours like a military operation. When they emerged, Sophie looked like any other fourth grader heading to St. Catherine's Elementary. Navy jumper, white polo shirt, hair in neat braids. Elena had spent 20 minutes on those braids this morning, working in the dim light of the locker room, making sure every strand was perfect. The uniform was 2 years old and the hem had been let out twice, but it was clean and pressed. Elena had ironed it with the travel iron she kept in the trunk, plugged into an outlet at the library last night. Whatever else fell apart, Sophie's uniform stayed pristine. Her daughter would not be the kid who showed up looking like she lived in a car. Even if she did live in a car. Elena's own clothes were Target clearance rack, 3 years old and wearing thin at the knees, but professional enough for teaching. She had learned to tie scarves in ways that disguised the fraying collar of her one good blouse. Art teacher chic, she joked to herself in better days. Now it was just survival. They drove in silence to St. Catherine's where Elena dropped Sophie at the early drop-off program. The hug lasted 5 seconds longer than usual. Sophie squeezed hard enough that Elena felt it in her ribs. "I love you, Mom. Love you more, baby." The words had become ritual, a promise renewed every morning. "I love you. I am still here. We will get through this together." Then Elena drove across town to Henderson High, where she taught Introduction to Studio Art to teenagers who mostly cared more about their phones than perspective drawing. She parked in the teacher's lot and walked through the morning chill with her lesson plans and her grandmother's death sitting heavy in her chest. The other teachers in the break room were discussing weekend plans. Elena poured coffee from the communal pot and nodded along, contributing nothing. She had become expert at being present without participating, smiling without engaging, answering questions without revealing anything real. Sarah from English asked if Elena was okay. She looked tired. Elena smiled and blamed allergies and escaped to her classroom, where she could be alone with her thoughts and her grief and the suffocating weight of another day pretending everything was fine. Her classroom was her sanctuary. Walls covered with student work, supplies organized with obsessive precision, the smell of paint and turpentine and possibility. Here, at least, she could breathe. Here, at least, she could be herself. Her students filed in at 7:50. 23 juniors who ranged from genuinely interested in art to deeply asleep. Elena launched into her lesson on value scales, demonstrating shading techniques while her mind wandered to Monday morning and Frederick Patterson's professionally gentle voice and the wild, desperate hope that maybe Maggie had left something that would change their lives. She taught 3 more classes that day, each one a performance, each one requiring her to pretend that the world made sense and the future held promise and hard work would be rewarded. She taught these teenagers to see beauty in charcoal and shadow, to find meaning in the space between lines. She wondered sometimes if she was lying to them, teaching them that art mattered when the world seemed determined to prove that only money mattered. But then a student would show her a drawing they had worked on for hours, eyes bright with pride, and Elena would remember why she did this. Because beauty was worth fighting for. Because meaning mattered even when the world said it did not. Because someone had to teach these kids that there was more to life than stock prices and status symbols. Even if that someone was sleeping in her car. Monday arrived with unseasonable cold. Elena had cashed her biweekly paycheck on Friday afternoon, $2,180 direct deposit. By Monday morning, 900 had gone to the storage unit where everything they owned sat in a 10 by 10 space, 420 to car insurance, 250 to the minimum payment on credit cards she had maxed out during the divorce. That left $610 for the entire month. Gas, food, Sophie's lunch money, phone bill, gym membership, and the constant terrifying knowledge that one car repair would destroy them. She had taken 120 for this trip. Gas to Denver and back with enough left over for basic supplies if the mountain property everyone said was worthless turned out to be livable. A lottery ticket purchased with desperation instead of hope. The law office occupied the 8th floor of a building downtown that screamed money in every brass fixture and polished marble tile. Elena and Sophie rode the elevator in silence, both dressed in their best. Elena's one funeral-appropriate dress, Sophie's uniform because it was the nicest thing she owned. The receptionist directed them to a conference room that could have held Elena's entire classroom. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Denver spread out below like a map of possibilities. A table that probably cost more than Elena made in a year dominated the center of the room. Leather chairs that whispered expense lined both sides. Frederick Patterson was already there, arranging papers with the careful precision of a man who had done this too many times to be moved by the grief it caused. White hair, expensive suit, the kind of face that had learned to be neutral in the presence of every human emotion. He looked up as Elena entered and something in his eyes softened. Sympathy, maybe. Or recognition of something in her face that reminded him why he had become a lawyer in the first place. Ms. Hartwell, thank you for coming. Please sit. Elena and Sophie took seats on one side of the massive table. Patterson poured water from a crystal pitcher into glasses that probably cost $50 each. Elena's mouth was desert dry, but she could not bring herself to drink. Not yet. Not until she knew. Are we waiting for Derek and Caroline? They should be here shortly. Can I get you anything? Coffee? There are pastries in the break room. We are fine, thank you. Sophie's hand found Elena's under the table, small fingers squeezing tight. Elena squeezed back and tried to project a confidence she absolutely did not feel. Whatever happened in this room, Sophie would remember it. Elena needed to be strong for her daughter, even if she felt like she was falling apart inside. The door opened at 10:05. Derek arrived first, phone pressed to his ear, barely acknowledging Elena's presence. He dressed for this the way he dressed for board meetings. Tom Ford suit that probably cost $3,000. Apple Watch Ultra catching the light. Hair perfectly styled in that way that required a $200 monthly maintenance plan. He ended his call and dropped into a chair across from Elena without greeting her. Just a quick glance that took in her cheap dress and worn shoes and daughter in school uniform. Then back to his phone. Elena could see the Tesla app open. He was checking something about his car from 8 floors up while their grandmother's will waited to be read. 42 years old and still the boy who measured everything by its price tag. Caroline swept in at 10:10, bringing the scent of expensive perfume and the energy of someone who billed by the quarter hour. Maserati keys in hand, Hermes briefcase that Elena recognized from a magazine article about Caroline making partner at Crawford & Associates. Blonde hair perfectly styled, makeup perfect. The picture of professional success. She had worn a Cartier watch to their grandmother's funeral. Elena remembered because she had stared at it during the brief phone call where Carolyn had mentioned the service was happening but had not actually invited Elena to attend. The call had lasted 43 seconds. Elena had counted. 40 years old, 2 divorces, partner at one of Denver's most prestigious law firms, and still the girl who needed to be the smartest person in every room. Caroline's eyes swept over Elena and Sophie with an assessment that took approximately 1 second. Target dress, worn shoes, the unmistakable markers of struggle. Something flickered in her expression that might have been pity or might have been satisfaction. Either way, it made Elena's skin crawl. Shall we begin? Patterson's voice carried the gentle firmness of a man trying to keep this professional. Derek set his phone face down on the table. Caroline opened a leather notepad and clicked a pen that probably cost more than Elena's grocery budget. Both of them looked at Patterson with the focused attention of people waiting to learn how much richer they were about to become. Patterson cleared his throat and began reading in the flat legal tone that made even death sound like a contract negotiation. Margaret Elizabeth Hartwell, being of sound mind and body, had executed her will on March 3rd of the previous year. There were small bequests to various charities. $15,000 to the Denver Art Initiative, $5,000 to the Copperfield Public Library. Another $10,000 split between the local food bank and women's shelter. Derek shifted impatiently. His foot tapped against the floor. His fingers drummed on the table. The body language of a man who had somewhere more important to be. Caroline made a note. Her pen scratched against the paper. Efficient, clinical. Elena felt Sophie press closer against her side. Her daughter could feel the tension in the room, could sense that something was coming. To my grandson, Derek Hartwell, I leave the property located at 2847 Cherry Hills Drive, including all structures, furnishings, and landscaping. Derek nodded. Elena knew that address. The lakefront house, probably worth $1.4 million at current market rates. 5 bedrooms, 3-car garage, a dock where Maggie used to sit and watch the sunset. Derek's expression did not change. He had expected this. Maybe he had already calculated what he would do with it. Sell it, develop it, turn it into something profitable. To my granddaughter, Carolyn Hartwell Webb, I leave my complete collection of antique jade pieces, professionally appraised at $950,000, as well as my vintage jewelry collection, appraised at $180,000. Caroline made another note. Her face remained neutral, but her eyes gleamed. Over $1 million in jewelry and jade, a collection their grandmother had spent a lifetime building. Caroline would probably sell it all within 6 months. Patterson paused. His eyes found Elena's with something that looked like apology, something that looked like warning. To my granddaughter, Elena Hartwell, I leave the sum of $5 in cash in the original mountain homestead located at Copper Ridge, Colorado. GPS coordinates and property deed to be provided separately. The silence that followed had weight and shape. It pressed down on the room like a physical thing. Elena felt it in her chest, in her throat, in the sudden heat rising to her face. $5, a mountain shack. That was what her grandmother had left her. Then Derek laughed. It was not a chuckle or a quiet expression of disbelief. It was a full, genuine laugh that echoed off the conference room walls and seemed to go on forever. His head tilted back. His shoulders shook. The sound of it made Elena's vision narrow to pinpoints. $5? Derek could barely get the words out. $5? That is it? Carolyn was not laughing, but her lips had curved into something that was not quite a smile, more like satisfaction at being proven right about something she had always believed. The old mountain shack. That place has not been occupied in 40 years. The structure is probably condemned by now. Derek was still laughing, wiping his eyes. Elena, I am sorry, but this is almost funny. $5. I spend more than that on coffee. I spend more than that on parking. Caroline's voice cut through with surgical precision, though perhaps proportional to life contributions. Derek built a $50 million tech company. I made partner at Crawford. You draw pictures with teenagers for $37,000 a year. The words landed like physical blows. Elena's hands clenched under the table, but she kept her face still. 7 months sleeping in a car had taught her how to take hits without flinching, how to let cruelty wash over her without giving the satisfaction of a reaction, how to absorb pain and keep moving because there was no other choice. Sophie's hand squeezed harder. Elena squeezed back. We are okay, the pressure said. We have survived worse than this. We will survive this too. Patterson cleared his throat. Mrs. Hartwell left specific instructions regarding the mountain property. She requested that Elena visit the site personally before making any decisions about disposition. Disposition means getting rid of it. Caroline's tone dripped condescension. In case legal terminology is unfamiliar, Derek leaned back in his chair, still grinning. What is there to decide? The place is worthless, not even worth the property taxes. You would have to pay to keep it. Actually, the property taxes are current and paid through the end of the year. Patterson's voice carried a hint of steel. Elena saw something in his expression, something like anger on her behalf. And there are no liens or encumbrances. The 40 acres are fully yours, Ms. Hartwell. 40 acres of rocks and a collapsing cabin. Derek spread his hands in mock generosity. Congratulations, little sister. You are officially a slumlord. Caroline gathered her papers with efficient movements. When you are ready to dispose of it, Derek knows contractors who can handle the demolition and land sale. Consider it a family favor. She stood and Derek followed, both of them preparing to leave, to return to their important lives in expensive cars and the comfortable knowledge that they had gotten what they deserved. At the door, Derek paused and turned back. His grin had faded into something that might have been genuine concern if Elena had not known him better. Seriously, Elena, call me when you are ready to dump it. I will make sure you get at least enough to cover the hassle. Then they were gone. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a coffin lid. Elena sat in the sudden silence, staring at her hands folded on the table, breathing carefully through the rage and humiliation in the small, stupid part of her that had hoped for something different. Patterson pushed a thick manila envelope across the table. Inside, you will find the property deed, GPS coordinates, keys to the structure, and a personal letter from your grandmother. Elena took the envelope with numb fingers. It was heavier than she had expected. I should tell you, Patterson continued, his voice gentler now. Your grandmother spoke very highly of you in our meetings. Very highly. She was quite clear that you were to receive the mountain property specifically because, and I quote, Elena will understand when the time is right. What is there to understand? The words came out harder than Elena intended. It is a worthless shack my siblings are right to laugh at. Patterson studied her for a long moment. His eyes held something she could not quite read. Knowledge, maybe. Or hope. Your grandmother was many things, Miss Hartwell, but she was not cruel, and she was not foolish. If she left you this property, she had reasons. He stood and gathered his papers. Take your time. The room is yours for as long as you need. When he left, Elena finally let herself feel it. Not tears. She had run out of those somewhere around month 3 of sleeping in her car. Just a hollow ache that started in her chest and spread outward until her entire body felt empty. Sophie shifted in her seat. Mom, I know, baby. Uncle Derek was mean. He was. And Aunt Caroline, too. Yeah, she was. Sophie pulled the manila envelope closer and opened it carefully. Her small hands moved with the precision of someone who had learned to value every object, to treat everything with care because replacement was impossible. Inside was a smaller jewelry box, aged leather with tarnished brass clasps. She opened it and gasped. Mom, look, Maggie's jade bracelet, the one Elena had admired every time she had visited her grandmother. The one Caroline had probably assumed would be part of her jade collection. It was simple and beautiful, the green stone worn smooth by decades of wear. Elena lifted it out with shaking hands. Inside the band, engraved in delicate script, to Maggie for keeping promises, 1967. Grandma knew. Sophie's voice was soft with wonder. She knew what you would need. That night, Elena sat in the driver's seat of the Honda while Sophie slept in the back. The parking lot had gone quiet. Most of the late shoppers had left. Only a few other cars remained, scattered across the vast expanse of asphalt like islands in a dark sea. She finally opened the letter Patterson had mentioned. Maggie's handwriting covered 3 pages in the careful script of someone who had taken her time, someone who had known these words needed to last. The paper smelled faintly of lavender, Maggie's signature scent. Elena pressed the pages to her face and breathed in the last trace of her grandmother. My dearest Elena, it began. They laughed, did not they? Elena pressed her hand to her mouth and kept reading. Derek and Caroline. I knew they would. That is why I am trusting you, not them. The mountain property is not what it seems. Your great-great-grandmother, Sarah Blackwood, built that homestead in 1867. She was half Irish, half Ute, rejected by both worlds. But she survived, she thrived, and she hid something there, something I have protected for 70 years, waiting for the right person. Not the richest person, not the most successful person, the right person. You, Elena, you have been tested by life in ways they never have. Homeless, divorced, broke, but you still protect Sophie's joy, still teach beauty to ungrateful teenagers, still believe in goodness when the world has given you every reason not to. That is rare, that is strong. That is the kind of strength Sarah had, the kind that does not show up on balance sheets or in corner offices. Go to the cabin, northeast corner, loose floorboard. Look for the trap door. Combination is 1867, the year Sarah built her home. What is below will change everything. But Elena, listen carefully. How you use it will define who you are. This is not just money. This is a 150-year promise Sarah made to a man named Gray Eagle, a Ute elder who showed her kindness when the world showed her none. I have kept that promise. Now I am passing it to you. Trust yourself. You survived homelessness with grace. You can handle this. I love you. I have always been proudest of you, not because of what you achieved, but because of who you chose to be when achieving was impossible. P.S. Do not trust Victor Mercer. He knows about the mine. He has been trying to get it from me for 15 years. He is more dangerous than you can imagine. He has done terrible things to get what he wants. Be careful. Elena read the letter 3 times, then a 4th. Each time the words seemed more impossible, a hidden something, a trapdoor, a 150-year promise, a man named Gray Eagle, and a warning about someone named Victor Mercer who was dangerous, who had done terrible things. At the bottom of the envelope, wrapped in tissue paper, was a pocket watch. Gold, heavy, ornate. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Every line precise, every detail perfect. Elena turned it over and found an inscription. To Sarah, time reveals all truths, 1867. The watch still ticked, perfect rhythm, keeping time after more than a century and a half. Elena held it to her ear and listened to the steady beat. It sounded like a heart, like Sarah's heart, still beating across the years, still waiting for someone to hear its message. And for the first time in months, Elena let herself imagine that maybe tomorrow would be different from today. But as she sat there in the darkness of the Walmart parking lot, another thought crept in. A colder thought. If Victor Mercer had been trying to get the property from Maggie for 15 years, he would know about the will. He would know Elena had inherited it. And if he was as dangerous as Maggie warned, he would not simply give up because the property had changed hands. He has done terrible things to get what he wants. What kind of terrible things? Elena looked up from the letter and scanned the parking lot. 3 rows back, barely visible in the shadows between sodium lights, sat a black SUV, lights off, engine silent. But there was a shape behind the wheel, someone sitting, watching. Elena's heart began to pound. She told herself it was nothing, probably someone else sleeping in their car. Walmart parking lots were full of people with nowhere else to go. She knew that better than anyone. But she could not shake the feeling that she was being watched, that somewhere in the darkness, someone was waiting to see what she would do next. She locked the doors, checked them twice, then lay back in her seat and pulled her coat over herself like a blanket. Sleep did not come for hours. And when it did, she dreamed of mountains and buried secrets and a woman named Sarah Blackwood who had built something worth protecting for 158 years. She dreamed of silver glinting in darkness and promises made between people who had nothing in common except their refusal to break their word. The next morning, Elena made her decision. She would go to Copper Ridge. She would find the trap door. She would see what her great-great-grandmother had hidden. And she would do it before Victor Mercer, whoever he was, could stop her. She had nothing to lose. A car that might not start tomorrow. A daughter who deserved better. And a letter from a dead grandmother who had believed in her when no one else did. That would have to be enough. Elena started the Honda, listened to the engine cough and catch, and pulled out of the parking lot as the sun began to rise over the mountains to the west. The sky turned from black to purple to pink to gold. Sophie woke up and watched the colors change through the window. "It is beautiful," she said. "It is. Where are we going?" "To find out what Grandma Maggie left us." The road led west, toward the mountains, toward Copper Ridge, toward whatever waited in the darkness beneath a cabin built 158 years ago by a woman who had survived things Elena could only imagine. Somewhere in those mountains, a secret waited. Somewhere in those mountains, a promise waited to be kept. And somewhere in the shadows, a black SUV pulled out of its parking space and began to follow. Inside that SUV, Victor Mercer smiled. He was 58 years old with silver hair cut short in a military style and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite by someone who did not believe in soft edges. His hands bore the scars of a lifetime working in mines. His eyes held the cold calculation of a man who had learned that sentiment was weakness and mercy was a mistake. He had waited 15 years for this moment, 15 years of offers and threats and patient watching. The old woman had been stubborn. Impossible. She had turned down $500,000, turned down $1 million, kept talking about promises and legacy, and sentimental garbage that had no place in the real world. But the old woman was dead now, and her granddaughter, this homeless art teacher with her 9-year-old daughter, would be much easier to deal with. One way or another, Victor picked up his phone and dialed. The voice that answered was rough, the voice of a man who had spent time in places where rough voices were the norm. "She is heading to this property. Get the boys ready. We move tonight." "What about the kid?" Victor paused. He did not like involving children, but he also did not like loose ends. "We will see how cooperative the mother is. If she is smart, the kid will be fine. And if she is not smart, then we do what needs to be done." He ended the call and pressed the accelerator slightly, closing the gap between his SUV and the struggling Honda. 15 years. 20 years ago, he had killed a woman for a mine worth half of what this one was worth. An unfortunate accident, the report had said. Old mines were dangerous places. Things happen. Things could happen again. The game had begun, and Victor Mercer intended to win. The drive to Copper Ridge took 3 hours through mountain passes that still held snow in shadowed places. Elena gripped the steering wheel with both hands, feeling every vibration of the Honda's struggling engine through her palms. The check engine light glowed orange on the dashboard, like a warning from some mechanical god that she could not afford to heed. She had stopped at Walmart before leaving Denver. $120. Her last real money until the next paycheck. 2 weeks away. She had walked the aisles with the precision of a surgeon, calculating every purchase against survival. 2 heavy-duty flashlights, extra batteries, the bulk pack that cost more upfront but saved money per unit, a first aid kit, military surplus, cheaper than the name brand and twice as useful. She had learned that trick in the Peace Corps, climbing rope rated for 500 pounds, because she did not know what she would find and wanted to be prepared for anything. Emergency blankets, the thin metallic kind that weighed nothing and could mean the difference between hypothermia and survival. Waterproof matches in a sealed container. A water filtration bottle that could make stream water safe to drink. For food, she kept it simple. Peanut butter high in protein and calories. Bread that would last a few days. Apples for vitamins. Granola bars for quick energy. 2 gallons of bottled water because dehydration killed faster than hunger. The total came to $94.37. She had $25.63 left. Enough for emergency gas, maybe one meal at a diner if things went wrong. And from the bottom of her trunk, retrieved from a plastic bin that held the remnants of a different life, her Leatherman multi-tool. She had bought it 15 years ago, before Sophie was born, before Nathan, before everything fell apart. Back when she had spent 2 years in the Peace Corps in Ecuador, teaching art to children in villages that had no electricity and no running water. Those 2 years had changed her, had stripped away the soft edges that growing up in suburban Denver had given her, had taught her that comfort was an illusion and survival was a skill, and the human body could endure far more than the human mind wanted to believe. She had learned to find water in places that looked dry, learned to read weather in the way birds flew and leaves turned, learned to stay calm when a child in her class collapsed from malaria and the nearest doctor was 3 hours away by foot, learned to keep going when every part of her wanted to quit. Those skills had seemed useless when she returned to America. When she married Nathan and bought a house and settled into a life of lesson plans and parent-teacher conferences, she had packed them away like old clothes that no longer fit. But driving toward Copper Ridge, watching the road deteriorate from pavement to gravel to rutted dirt, she felt them coming back. Muscle memory of a different Elena, a stronger Elena, an Elena who had not yet learned that the people who were supposed to love you could hurt you worse than any stranger. Sophie sat in the passenger seat, homework spread across her lap. Long division. She worked the problems with a pencil that needed sharpening, tongue poking out in concentration. The bumps in the road made her numbers wobbly, but she kept going, kept trying. That was Sophie. Never gave up, even when giving up made sense. "Mom, what is 347 divided by 9? Elena did the math in her head while navigating a pothole that could have swallowed a small dog. 38 remainder 5. Sophie checked her work and made a small sound of satisfaction. Elena glanced over and felt her heart squeeze. 9 years old and still finding incorrect answers, still believing that the world made sense, that hard work led to rewards, that numbers added up the way they were supposed to. Elena hoped she would never have to learn otherwise. Hope that whatever waited at the end of this road would give Sophie a chance to keep believing in a universe that rewarded effort and punished laziness. But she knew that was probably not how things worked. The road climbed higher, trees pressed close on both sides, pines heavy with old snow that had not yet melted despite the calendar saying it was late March. The Honda's engine whined on the steep grades, the temperature gauge creeping toward the red zone. Elena eased off the accelerator and let the car find its own pace. Pushing would only blow the engine, and then they would be stranded in mountains where cell phones did not work, and the nearest help was hours away. Sophie finished her math and looked out the window at the wilderness passing by. The trees grew thicker here, blocking out the sky. Shadows pulled in every direction. It felt like driving into another world, a world where the rules of suburban life did not apply. "Mom, are we poor?" The question hung into the cold air between them. Elena had known it was coming, had been waiting for it since the will reading, since Derek's laughter and Caroline's smirk and the $5 inheritance that was supposed to be a joke. "We are going through a tough time. That is different from poor. Poor is permanent. What we have is temporary." Sophie considered this with the seriousness of a philosopher examining a difficult premise. She was always like that, thinking through things, not just accepting what adults told her. Uncle Derek thinks we are poor. Uncle Derek measures worth by the numbers in bank accounts. He thinks success means expensive cars and big apartments and watches that cost more than most people make in a month. Elena paused, choosing her next words carefully. "There are things that matter more than money." "Like what?" Elena thought about her grandmother's letter, about Sarah Blackwood and Gray Eagle, and a promise kept for 158 years, about the inscription on the jade bracelet, "For keeping promises," like keeping your word, like not abandoning the people who need you, like doing the right thing when doing the wrong thing would be easier and more profitable. Sophie nodded slowly, processing this. Then she said something that made Elena's breath catch. "Is that why Grandma Maggie left you the mountain instead of Uncle Derek? Because you keep your word?" Elena did not have an answer, but she thought maybe her daughter had understood something that Derek and Caroline would never grasp, something about worth that could not be measured in dollars. The GPS died somewhere past the town of Fairplay, signal lost to mountain terrain. The screen went blank, then displayed a message that might as well have said, "Good luck. You are on your own now." Elena pulled over and retrieved the paper map from her grandmother's envelope. The handwriting was Maggie's, careful and precise. "Turn right at mile marker 47, follow dirt road 2.3 miles, left at the split oak tree, continue 4.1 miles to the clearing." Old school navigation, no satellites required. The turnoff appeared just where the directions indicated, marked by a faded wooden post that she would have missed if she had not been looking for it. Someone had carved letters into the wood decades ago, but weather had worn them nearly smooth. Elena could just make out the words. "Copper Ridge Trail, 4-wheel drive recommended." Elena looked at her 2-wheel drive Honda with its check engine light and worn tires and bald spot on the rear left that she had been meaning to replace for 6 months. The responsible choice would be to turn back, find another way, come back with a proper vehicle. But Elena had stopped making responsible choices 7 months ago, when Nathan took the house and her savings and left her with nothing but a car and a daughter and the crushing knowledge that the life she had built was a lie. "We can do this." She said it out loud, not sure if she was talking to Sophie or to herself or to the Honda that had somehow kept running through everything. The car seemed to understand. It lurched forward onto the dirt road with a groan of protest but no actual failure. The road was worse than expected. Much worse. Deep ruts carved by spring runoff. Rocks that scraped the undercarriage with sounds that made Elena wince. Branches that whipped against the windows. The Honda bounced and struggled and made noises that suggested imminent mechanical death. But it kept going, just like Elena, just like Sophie. 15 minutes of teeth-rattling progress. Climbing steadily higher. The air grew thinner, colder. Elena could feel the altitude in her lungs, a slight shortness of breath that reminded her of Ecuador, of mountain villages where the sky seemed close enough to touch, of children who had nothing but still found reasons to laugh. Then the road opened into a clearing, and Elena's foot hit the brake hard enough that Sophie lurched forward against her seatbelt. The cabin sat 50 feet ahead, caught in the dying light of late afternoon. It was smaller than Elena had imagined, maybe 20 feet square, built from logs that had weathered to silver gray over more than a century and a half. The roof sagged on the left side, several shingles missing, creating gaps like broken teeth. The front porch had partially collapsed, one corner touching the ground at an angle that suggested complete structural failure was one hard winter away. But it was the setting that stole Elena's breath. The cabin had been built directly against a cliff face, granite wall rising 100 feet straight up, sheer and unclimbable, creating a natural barrier on the north side. Pine trees surrounded the clearing on the other three sides, heavy with old snow, ancient, silent. Elena's Peace Corps training kicked in immediately. She scanned the terrain with eyes that had learned to read landscape like text. One road in, one road out. High ground on three sides, providing natural defense against approach. Clear sight lines across the entire clearing. Anyone coming would be visible long before they arrived. And that cliff wall, impossible to approach from behind. Impossible to be surprised from that direction. The woman who built this place knew exactly what she was doing. This was not just a home. This was a fortress, built by someone who expected trouble and prepared for it. Sophie's voice was barely above a whisper. It looks like a witch's house, but a good witch, like in the stories, the kind who helps people who get lost in the woods. Elena parked 20 feet from the cabin and turned off the engine. The sudden silence was profound. No traffic sounds, no city hum, no neighbors mowing lawns or dogs barking or televisions murmuring through walls, just whine through pine branches. The distant call of a bird she could not identify, and the settling ticks of the Honda's engine cooling. They sat without moving, staring at the structure that held her grandmother's secret. The structure that had been in her family for 158 years. The structure that Victor Mercer wanted badly enough to threaten a woman and her child. Elena's phone buzzed, one bar of signal flickering in and out like a dying heartbeat. A text from Derek. Lawsuit filed. Monday 9 a.m. hearing. Hope you are ready. She stared at the words until they stopped making sense. Her brother, her own brother, filing a lawsuit to take the one thing their grandmother had chosen to give her. She turned the phone face down and looked at her daughter. We will sleep in the car tonight. In the morning, we will see what is inside. Sophie nodded and began the familiar routine of arranging coats for blankets. She had done this so many times that the motions were automatic. Fold the first coat lengthwise, lay it across the back seat, spread the second coat on top, tuck the third coat around her shoulders like a sleeping bag. 7 months of practice, 7 months of making do, 7 months of turning a car into something that almost felt like home. Elena reclined her seat and stared through the windshield at the cabin's dark shape against the darker cliff. The sun had dropped behind the western peaks. Shadows pooled in the clearing like dark water, rising slowly, swallowing everything. She thought about Sarah Blackwood, the woman who had built this cabin in 1867, half Irish, half Ute, rejected by both worlds, but strong enough to carve out a space for herself in a wilderness that killed weaker people. She thought about what it must have taken. A woman alone in these mountains, 158 years ago. No power tools, no hardware store down the road, no one to call if things went wrong. Just determination and skill, and the stubborn refusal to let a hostile world tell her what she could and could not do. Elena closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but somewhere around 3 in the morning she heard it. Not wind through trees, not a branch falling, footsteps, crunching through snow, coming closer. Elena's eyes snapped open. Her hand found the pepper spray in the cup holder. Her other hand moved slowly, silently to cover Sophie's mouth in case the girl woke and made a sound. Through the frost on the windshield, she saw flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. 2 of them, moving around the cabin, sweeping across windows, probing into shadows. 2 men. She could see their shapes now. Large. Moving with the confidence of people who had done this before. They were not afraid, not cautious. They expected to find the place empty. One of them kicked the cabin door open. The sound echoed across the clearing like a gunshot. Elena flinched but did not move. The flashlight beams disappeared inside. Through the empty windows, she could see them sweeping across walls, across floors, searching for something. One of them spoke, and the sound carried clearly in the mountain silence. Nothing here. The old woman must have moved it somewhere else. The other voice was rougher, impatient, the voice of someone who did not like complications. Mercer said, check thoroughly. The trap door is somewhere in the house. Keep looking. Elena stopped breathing. They knew about the trap door. Victor Mercer had sent them. He knew about the trap door. He knew what was hidden beneath this cabin. and he had sent men to find it before Elena could. The flashlight beams moved methodically through the cabin. She heard the sound of wood being pried up, floorboards groaning. The men were systematic, professional, but they were looking in the wrong place. 20 minutes. Elena counted each one, hand pressed over Sophie's mouth, body frozen in the driver's seat. 20 minutes of searching, 20 minutes of voices she could not quite make out, 20 minutes of absolute terror. Sophie stirred once, made a small sound. Elena pressed harder on her mouth and the girl settled back into sleep. Thank God for exhaustion. Thank God that 9-year-olds could sleep through anything when they were tired enough. Then the flashlights moved away from the cabin. Back toward the road, Elena heard an engine start somewhere in the darkness beyond the tree line. Headlights swept across the clearing but did not find the Honda, parked in the shadow of a large pine. The engine sound faded. The darkness returned. The silence settled back over the clearing like a blanket. Elena did not sleep again that night. She lay in the darkness with her hand still resting on Sophie's shoulder, thinking, planning, trying to understand what she had inherited and who was trying to take it from her. Victor Mercer knew about the trapdoor. That meant he knew about whatever was hidden below. He had been trying to get this property from Maggie for 15 years. 15 years of offers and threats and patient waiting. And now Maggie was dead, and Elena was here. And Victor Mercer was not going to stop just because the property had changed hands. He has done terrible things to get what he wants. Maggie's words from the letter. Elena had not fully understood them until now. Until she had heard men searching the cabin in the darkness. Until she had realized that this was not just about money. This was about survival. Dawn came with the kind of clarity that mountain air provides. Sharp, clean, every detail visible. Elena watched the sun rise over the peaks to the east, painting the granite cliff behind the cabin in shades of gold and pink and colors that did not have names. Sophie woke slowly, confused for a moment about where she was. Then memory returned, and she sat up and looked at the cabin with determined eyes. Are we going inside now? Yes, but carefully. They approached the cabin like soldiers entering hostile territory. Elena tested each porch board before committing weight. The wood groaned but held. 3 of the boards were soft with rot, flexing dangerously under pressure. She marked them mentally and stepped over, guiding Sophie to do the same. The door hung crooked on its hinges, kicked half off by the men who had searched last night. Elena pushed it open and stepped inside. The smell hit first. Decades of dust, thick enough to coat the back of her throat. Mouse droppings in the corners, old wood releasing the faint tang of resin. And underneath, something else, something mineral and cold that seemed to rise from the floorboards themselves. One room, 20 feet by 20 feet, a pot-bellied stove squatted in the far corner, rust eating through cast iron. A table leaned against the wall, one leg snapped clean through. Shelves lined the eastern side, empty except for tin cups that had oxidized to tarnished green. An alcove extended to the north, just large enough for a bed. Light filtered through gaps in the roof, creating columns of illuminated dust that moved with their breathing. Elena saw the signs of last night's intrusion immediately. Dust disturbed on the floor, footprints in the grime, floorboards pried up near the door and then replaced carelessly. A shelf knocked askew. They had searched. They had searched thoroughly, but they had searched the wrong place. Her grandmother's letter had been specific. Northeast corner, loose floorboard. The men had started at the door near the south wall. They had worked their way inward, but had not reached the alcove before they gave up. Elena moved through the space with careful steps, reading the room the way she had learned to read landscapes, looking for what did not belong, what had been placed with intention. Sophie followed, equally careful, her eyes scanning everything with the intensity of a child who had learned that details mattered, that overlooking the wrong thing could mean the difference between safety and danger. Someone was here last night. I can see their footprints. I know, I heard them. Sophie's eyes went wide. You heard them? While you were sleeping, I stayed awake. I heard them searching. Were you scared? Elena knelt down to examine the disturbed floorboards near the door. The men had pried these up with tools, crowbars probably, looking for something beneath. They had found nothing but dirt and spiders in the foundations of a building that had stood for over a century. Yes, I was scared, but being scared does not mean you stop thinking. Being scared means you think harder. You stay quiet, you wait, And then you act when the time is right. She moved toward the alcove, toward the northeast corner, toward the spot her grandmother had specified in the letter. The dust here was thinner than the rest of the cabin. The protected corner had kept some of the decay at bay. Elena knelt and ran her hands along the floorboards, pressing gently, testing. Most were solid, firm, nailed down with the care of someone who expected them to last. But one, in the far corner where the alcove met the cabin wall, shifted slightly under her touch. Found it. She worked her fingers into the gap between boards and pulled. The board came up easily, the nails long since rusted to powder. Beneath it, more boards ran perpendicular, and wedged between them, partially visible, was a metal tin about the size of a shoebox. Elena's hands were steady as she freed it from its hiding place. 158 years of secrets, wrapped in tin and wax and hope. The tin was old but intact, sealed against moisture by a layer of wax that cracked as she pried the lid open. Inside, wrapped in wax paper that had somehow survived the decades, were 3 photographs and a handwritten note. And beneath those, a leather-bound journal that had been protected with obvious care. The first photograph showed a woman standing in front of this cabin. Not young, maybe 40 or 50, with features that marked her as exactly what Maggie's letter had described. Eyes that held both Irish green and something darker, deeper. Cheekbones that spoke of native heritage. Skin weathered by sun and wind, and a life lived outdoors in all seasons. She wore work clothes that would have been considered men's clothing in her era, and she held herself with the posture of someone who had learned to claim space despite a world that wanted her to disappear. On the back, in faded ink, Sarah Blackwood, 1807. The second photograph showed the same woman, older now, maybe 60, standing in the same spot in front of the same cabin. But the cabin looked newer in this image. The roof straight, the porch intact. She held something in her hands, something small and rectangular that the photograph's age had rendered too blurry to identify. The third photograph made Elena's breath catch. A young Maggie, maybe 30 years old, standing in this cabin in this very room. She smiled at the camera with determination and joy and the fierce pride of someone who had found her purpose, who had accepted a responsibility that would shape the rest of her life. On the back, Margaret Hartwell, 1974. Elena opened the leather journal carefully. The binding cracked but held. The pages inside were filled with handwriting that matched the note. Sarah Blackwood's hand, her voice reaching across 158 years. The first entry was dated March 15th, 1867. I have claimed this land today. $1.25 per acre. Paid in gold, I panned from the creek myself. The claims office did not want to process it. A half-breed woman owning property. But law is law. This land is mine now. No one can take it from me. Elena turned pages carefully, reading fragments of a life that had been lived in these same mountains, in this same clearing, under this same sky. April 3rd, 1867. Built the cabin with my own hands. Men from town came to watch, to mock. A woman doing man's work, they said. Let them mock. By winter, this cabin will have walls and a roof and a fire burning. They will still be drunk in the saloons, talking about what women cannot do. May 18th, 1867. Found the vein today. Not gold like I hoped. Silver. But the assayer says this silver is different. Wire formation. Worth more than gold to the right buyers. I will tell no one. A half-breed woman with a silver mine. They would kill me for it. The journal continued, page after page. Sarah documenting her work, her discoveries, her fears and hopes. A woman alone in the wilderness, building something that would last. Sophie leaned close enough that her hair brushed Elena's cheek. She looks like us, the first woman. Same eyes. Elena saw it too. The shape of Sophie's face echoed in Sarah's bones. The set of Elena's jaw mirrored in how Sarah held her head. 5 generations in the blood still carried forward. Visible. Undeniable. A chain of women connected across time by something stronger than circumstance. The note was written in Sarah's hand, the paper fragile enough that Elena handled it like prayer. For the daughters of my blood who come after. Look beneath where I rest my head. The mountain keeps promises. Elena looked toward the alcove, the sleeping area, the northeast corner where they had just found this tin. But where I rest my head, that meant the spot where Sarah had slept. The spot where her pillow would have been. There is something else hidden here. They worked together, mother and daughter, removing floorboards with careful hands. Beneath the third board, nestled into a space that had been carved deliberately into the subfloor, they found it. A wooden hatch, 3 feet square, fitted so perfectly into the subfloor that it had been invisible until exposed. An iron ring handle set into the wood, and beside it, built into the hatch itself, a combination lock. 3 rotating dials, numbers 0 through 9 on each. Sophie's voice came out barely above a whisper. The trap door. This is what they were looking for. Elena pulled her grandmother's letter from her pocket with shaking hands. 1867, the year Sarah built her home. The combination. She set the first dial, 1, then 8, 6, 7. Her fingers found the iron ring and pulled. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo forever in the small cabin. A sound that had not been heard in years, maybe decades. Elena lifted the hatch slowly, fighting hinges that groaned after years without movement. Cool air rushed up from below, carrying the smell of deep earth and minerals. And something else, something that suggested vast spaces hidden beneath their feet. Elena pulled the heavy-duty flashlight from her backpack and aimed it into the darkness below. The beam revealed wooden ladder rungs descending into shadow. She could see the first 10 or 12, worn smooth by hands that had climbed up and down for years. Beyond that, the light could not penetrate. What is down there? Sophie's voice carried equal parts excitement and fear. I do not know yet, but Grandma Maggie knew, and Sarah knew before her, and now we are going to find out. But not yet. First, they needed more supplies, more information, and allies, if any could be found in this remote place. The drive to Copperfield took 40 minutes on roads that challenged the Honda's every capability. The town appeared suddenly, tucked into a valley between mountains. Population sign promising 412 residents. One main street, a gas station that looked frozen in 1985, a diner with 3 pickup trucks parked outside, a church with a steeple that needed paint, and at the end of the street, a 2-story building with a hand-painted sign. Ruth's General Store, established 1956. The bell over the door chimed as Elena entered. The interior smelled of coffee and old wood and something baking in back. Shelves packed with everything a mountain community might need. Canned goods, fishing tackle, ammunition, veterinary supplies, hand tools, rope, batteries. The woman behind the counter looked up from a crossword puzzle and studied Elena with eyes that had spent 7 decades reading people. White hair pulled back in a bun, face weathered by mountain sun and wind, hands that moved with efficiency born of decades of work. Help you? I need supplies. Flashlights, rope, camping gear. The woman came around the counter with surprising agility for her age, camping up in the mountains, getting late in the season. Weather can turn quick this high up. Just for a day or two, nothing extensive. Elena watched as the woman gathered items with practiced efficiency, 2 more heavy-duty flashlights, batteries, waterproof matches, emergency blankets, first aid supplies. You are not from around here. No, but my grandmother owned property nearby. Property nearby? The woman's expression shifted, curiosity sharpening into something more focused. What was your grandmother's name? Margaret Hartwell. Most people called her Maggie. The woman stopped moving entirely, set down the supplies she had been gathering, turned to face Elena directly. Maggie Hartwell. I will be damned. You are her granddaughter. I am. Elena Hartwell. This is my daughter, Sophie. Ruth Campbell. The woman's handshake was dry and strong. The handshake of someone who had spent a lifetime doing real work. I run this place. Knew your grandmother 40 years, maybe more. She came through here every few months like clockwork, bought supplies and headed up to that mountain property. Heard she passed recently. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. Ruth returned to gathering supplies, but her attention stayed on Elena's face, reading things that probably showed more clearly than Elena intended. The exhaustion, the fear, the desperate hope. Maggie was a good woman, private, kept to herself mostly, but good. She helped people around here when they needed it, never asked for anything in return. Ruth paused, seemed to make a decision. There is a geologist lives in town. Retired professor, Eleanor Hayes, Blue House on Maple Street. Maggie used to bring her rock samples sometimes. Might be worth talking to her. Why are you telling me this? Because your grandmother trusted me enough to talk to me sometimes. And because you look like someone who needs all the help she can get. The Blue House on Maple stood behind a garden that looked like a geological museum. Rock specimens arranged on low walls with hand-lettered labels. fossil-bearing stones creating borders around flower beds. Even the stepping stones had been chosen for their scientific interest. The woman who answered the door was tall and slightly stooped. White hair wild around a face that spoke of decades spent outdoors studying the earth. Thick glasses magnified blue eyes that fastened on Elena with immediate intensity. Dr. Eleanor Hayes? Yes, can I help you? Ruth Campbell suggested I speak with you. I am Elena Hartwell, Maggie Hartwell's granddaughter. The transformation was immediate. Eleanor Hayes straightened. Her eyes widened behind the thick glasses. She stepped back and opened the door wide. Come in, please. I have been wondering when someone from the family would come. The house interior had been converted into a combination home and laboratory. Geological maps covered the walls. Shelves held thousands of labeled rock specimens. A massive desk was buried under papers and equipment. Eleanor cleared chairs for Elena and Sophie, moving with the distracted efficiency of someone whose mind was always half occupied by scientific questions. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman, stubborn as granite and twice as hard to crack. She came to me 15 years ago with rock samples from her property, asked me to analyze them and keep the results confidential. She opened a filing cabinet and pulled out a folder, handed it to Elena. Inside were photographs of rock samples, chunks of stone shot through with gleaming veins that caught light like captured stars, and typed reports filled with geological terminology. Wire silver, museum quality. The formation is exceptional. Purity I have rarely seen in 45 years of studying Colorado mineral deposits. Eleanor sat down across from Elena. Her voice dropped lower. Conservative estimate for just the samples Maggie brought me, $4 to $6 million. Elena felt the room tilt slightly, but that is just samples. If there is an actual vein, if the deposit continues at this quality and quantity. Eleanor paused, making sure Elena understood. We are talking 18 to 25 million, perhaps more. The numbers did not make sense. Elena tried to process them and failed. 25 million was 700 years of her teaching salary. 25 million was more money than she could conceptualize. Why did Grandma not mine it? Eleanor's expression softened. She said it was not about money. Mention indigenous heritage, sacred sites, a promise that had been kept for generations. She was working on some kind of agreement, said when the time was right, someone in her family would complete it. The older woman leaned forward. I'm guessing that someone is you. Before Elena could answer, she heard a vehicle approaching outside, engine sound growing louder, then stopping, a door slamming. Eleanor looked toward the window. Her expression changed. That is Victor Mercer's truck. Elena felt ice spread through her veins. You know him? Everyone in these mountains knows Victor Mercer, and everyone knows to be careful around him. A knock at the door, heavy, insistent. Eleanor looked at Elena with eyes that held warning. Let me handle this. Stay quiet. Stay calm. She went to the door and opened it. Victor Mercer stood on the porch. 58 years old, silver hair cut military short, face carved from granite, eyes that held nothing resembling warmth. Eleanor, I heard we have a visitor in town. Maggie Hartwell's granddaughter. News travels fast. Small town. I wanted to welcome her personally. His eyes found Elena through the doorway, fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to run. Miss Hartwell, I am Victor Mercer. Your grandmother and I were old acquaintances. I was hoping we could talk. About what? About the property you inherited. I would like to make you an offer. A fair offer. $100,000. Cash. Elena stood slowly, moved to stand beside Eleanor in the doorway. The property is not for sale. Victor smiled. The smile did not reach his eyes. Everything is for sale. It is just a matter of finding the right price. Not everything. Thank you for the offer. The answer is no. Victor's smile faded. Something colder took its place. These mountains can be dangerous, Miss Hartwell. Accidents happen, especially to people who do not know the terrain. Is that a threat? Elena kept her voice steady, kept her hands at her sides, kept her eyes locked on his. Just friendly advice. Think about my offer. I will be in touch. He turned and walked back to his truck, got in, sat for a moment staring at them through the windshield, then drove away. Eleanor closed the door and leaned against it. That man is dangerous. Your grandmother told me stories. He has been trying to get that property for 15 years. He does not take no for an answer. What do I do? Eleanor straightened. Her eyes hardened with determination. First, you find out exactly what is hidden on that property. Then you get legal protection. There is a lawyer in town, Samuel Brooks. He handles mineral rights cases. I will call him. And then you decide what you are willing to fight for. That night, Elena and Sophie slept in the car again. parked in the clearing near the cabin, near the trap door that led to secrets worth millions. At 2 in the morning, Elena woke to the smell of smoke. She sat up slowly, scanned the clearing through the windshield. At the edge of the tree line, a fire burned, small, controlled, deliberately set. A message. We know you are here, we are watching. We can come whenever we want. Elena sat in the darkness, watching the fire burn down to embers, thinking about trap doors and silver veins and promises kept for 158 years. Tomorrow they would descend into the darkness beneath the cabin. Tomorrow they would discover what Sarah Blackwood had hidden and Maggie Hartwell had protected. Tomorrow everything would change. But tonight, Elena made a promise. To herself, to Sophie, to the grandmother who had believed in her. She would not run. She would not sell. She would not let Victor Mercer or anyone else take what was hers. Your word is your wealth. Everything else is just metal in the ground. Maggie had written that, and Elena was beginning to understand what it meant. Some things could not be bought. Some things could not be sold. Some things were worth more than any number, with any quantity of zeros after it. The fire at the edge of the clearing burned down to nothing. Elena watched it die, and she planned. She thought about Sarah Blackwood, who had built this cabin alone in 1867, who had found silver and kept it secret, who had made a promise to someone named Gray Eagle and kept that promise for 50 years. She thought about Maggie, who had inherited that promise and kept it for 70 more years, who had waited for the right person, who had chosen Elena over Derek and Caroline because she had seen something in her youngest grandchild that the others lacked. And she thought about Sophie, asleep in the back seat, 9 years old, already tougher than most adults, already wiser than her uncle and aunt combined. The chain of women stretched backward and forward through time, Sarah to Maggie to Elena to Sophie, each one carrying something precious, each one facing threats and choices in moments when the easy path led away from what was right. Elena was not going to be the one who broke that chain. Tomorrow, the real journey would begin. Morning light filtered through the gaps in the cabin roof, creating shafts of gold that cut through the dust like searchlights from heaven. Elena stood at the edge of the open trap door, heavy-duty flashlight in hand, staring down into darkness that seemed to swallow the beam after 15 feet. The air rising from below was cold and damp and carried the smell of deep earth and ancient stone. After Eleanor Hayes had arrived at dawn, her battered pickup bouncing up the rutted road with a determination that matched its driver. The truck bed was loaded with equipment that spoke of decades spent exploring Colorado's underground. Ropes coiled with military precision, climbing harnesses that showed wear from hundreds of expeditions, headlamps with battery packs that could run for 12 hours straight, a geological hammer with a worn wooden handle, the wood darkened by years of use, sample bags labeled and numbered according to some system only Eleanor understood, a field notebook that had seen countless journeys into darkness, 74 years old and still ready to climb into a hole in the ground, still eager to see what secrets the earth had hidden. Elena had to respect that, had to admire the kind of passion that did not fade with age but grew sharper, more focused, more desperate to experience everything before time ran out. I have been waiting for this moment for 15 years. Eleanor's voice was steady as she unpacked her gear, laying each item out on the cabin floor with the care of a surgeon preparing instruments. But her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, from anticipation, from the knowledge that after all this time she was finally going to see what Maggie Hartwell had protected so fiercely. Maggie showed me the samples, told me what was down there, but she never let me see it myself, said she was waiting for something, someone, I think she meant you. Sophie sat on an overturned crate near the cabin door, watching the preparations with the intense focus she brought to everything. Her eyes tracked every piece of equipment, every knot in the ropes, every adjustment to the harnesses. She had wanted to come down into the mine, had argued passionately that she was part of this, that whatever waited below belonged to her family too, that she had earned the right to see it through months of sleeping in cars and eating granola bars and pretending everything was fine. Elena had said no. It was the hardest no she had ever spoken. Harder than telling Nathan she wanted a divorce. Harder than admitting to her mother that she was sleeping in her car. Harder than anything she had ever had to do as a parent. Sophie's face had crumpled for just a moment before the 9-year-old armor slid back into place. The armor that 7 months of homelessness had forged. The armor that let her accept disappointment without breaking. That let her swallow grief so her mother would not see it. that made her older than any child should ever have to be. You stay up here, keep watch. If anyone comes, you hide in the trees and do not come out until I call for you. Do you understand? What if you do not call? Then you run to town. Find Ruth Campbell at the general store. Tell her what happened. Tell her to call the sheriff. Sophie had nodded, accepted the mission, transformed from daughter to lookout, from child to soldier. Elena watched her take up position near the window where she could see the road and felt something break inside her chest. This was not the childhood she had wanted for Sophie. This was not the life she had imagined when she held her newborn daughter in the hospital, promising to give her everything, to protect her from everything, to make sure she never knew the kind of pain that came from being abandoned by people who were supposed to love you. But here they were, and all Elena could do was keep going. The descent took longer than expected. Elena went first, testing each ladder rung before committing her full weight. The wood was old, darkened by time and the touch of hands that had made this climb hundreds of times over 50 years. But it was sound. Sarah Blackwood had built to last, had understood that cutting corners underground meant death. Each rung held firm beneath Elena's feet. She moved slowly, methodically, the way she had learned in Ecuador when climbing down into cenotes to help archaeologists document Mayan artifacts. Back then, she had been young and fearless. Now she was neither. But she still remembered the techniques, still knew how to distribute her weight, still understood that panic was the enemy of survival. 35 feet down, Elena counted the rungs to keep her mind focused. 10, 20, 30. The light from above grew dimmer with each step. The air grew colder, damper. The smell of minerals intensified until it coated the back of her throat like metal dust. Her feet touched solid stone and she exhaled a breath she had not realized she was holding. She unclipped from the safety line and swept her flashlight across the space around her, and understood immediately that this was not just a hole in the ground. She was standing in a tunnel, not a natural cave formed by water and time. A mine shaft, hand-carved from granite with tools that had left their marks in the rock like the signatures of ghosts, maybe 7 feet high at the center, sloping down toward the walls. 5 feet wide, just enough for one person to work. Timber beams supported the ceiling at regular intervals, each one fitted with precision, each one still solid after more than a century and a half. The floor had been worn smooth by decades of foot traffic. Elena could see the path that Sarah had walked thousands of times, could see where her feet had fallen, wearing grooves into the stone through sheer repetition. Someone had walked this tunnel so many times that their passage had literally changed the shape of the rock. Sarah Blackwood had done this, alone in the dark, with hand tools and lanterns and the kind of determination that most people could not even imagine. For 50 years, Elena felt something shift in her chest. Awe, maybe, or recognition, or the humbling realization that her own struggles, as hard as they seemed, were nothing compared to what this woman had endured. This was what determination looked like when it was measured not in days or weeks, but in decades. This was what a woman could build when she refused to let the world tell her what was possible, when she refused to accept the limitations that society placed on her because of her gender, her heritage, her circumstances. Sarah Blackwood had been a half-breed woman in 1807. Rejected by the Irish for being too native, rejected by the Ute for being too white, owning property when women barely had the right to vote, mining silver when women were supposed to stay home and raise children. And she had done it anyway, had built this tunnel with her own hands, had created something that lasted longer than most civilizations. Elena felt small, standing in the darkness, small and humbled and strangely comforted. If Sarah could do this, maybe Elena could survive what was coming. Eleanor descended behind her, moving with the careful efficiency of someone who had done this more times than she could count. Her headlamp swept across the walls, picking out details Elena had missed in her wonder. Look at the tool marks. See how consistent they are? Same angle, same depth, same spacing. One person did this. One person with one set of tools, working the same way for years, maybe decades. She ran her fingers along a timber beam, feeling the grain beneath her touch. These supports are over 150 years old and still solid. Not a trace of rot, no insect damage. Whoever built this knew exactly what they were doing, knew how to select wood, how to treat it, how to install it so the weight of the mountain above would actually strengthen the structure instead of crushing it. Sarah Blackwood, my great-great-grandmother. She built all of this? According to her journal, Started in 1867, worked every summer for 50 years. Every single summer. From the time she was 22 until she was 72. Eleanor was silent for a long moment, processing what that meant, trying to wrap her mind around the scale of it. 50 years alone in these mountains, carving a mine by hand, hauling ore out one bucket at a time, processing it, storing it, keeping it secret from everyone who would have killed her to take it. She shook her head slowly. That is not just determination. That is something else entirely. That is a kind of strength I have never seen in 45 years of studying what humans do underground. They moved deeper into the tunnel. Elena led, flashlight probing the darkness ahead, illuminating maybe 20 feet at a time. Eleanor followed close behind, her headlamp adding a second source of light, casting shadows that danced on the walls like the ghosts of all the women who had walked this path before them. 50 feet in, the air grew colder, the silence more absolute. 100 feet. The world above ceased to exist. There was only the tunnel, the darkness, the steady drip of water somewhere in the distance. The passage curved slightly to the east, following something invisible to Elena's untrained eyes but obvious to Eleanor. She is following the vein. See how the tunnel curves? She was tracking the silver through the rock, adjusting her direction based on where the ore concentrated. That takes skill. That takes experience. Most miners never develop that kind of instinct. At 200 feet, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. Elena stopped at the entrance and let her flashlight sweep across the space, and felt her breath catch in her throat. Wooden crates, dozens of them, stacked against the walls in neat rows like a warehouse of treasure, each one about 2 feet square, each one sealed with wax that had somehow survived a century and a half of mountain cold and underground damp. Against the far wall, a workbench built from planks that had been carried down piece by piece, tools arranged with military precision on its surface, pickaxes with heads worn smooth by use, hammers of various sizes, chisels with edges still sharp enough to cut, hand drills that would have required hours of turning to bore through rock. Everything a one-woman mining operation would need. And on the workbench, another journal, thicker than the one Elena had found above. The working record of 50 years of labor, 50 years of progress measured in inches, 50 years of a life dedicated to building something that would outlast the builder. Dear God, Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper, the voice of someone standing in a cathedral, the voice of reverence. She moved past Elena into the chamber, her headlamp sweeping across the crates with something approaching worship. She had spent her career studying mines, had seen the work of thousands of miners across 4 decades, but she had never seen anything like this. She approached the nearest crate, examined the wax seal with the care of an archaeologist uncovering a pharaoh's tomb. Then she looked back at Elena. "May I?" Elena nodded, unable to speak. Eleanor broke the seal carefully, preserving as much of the wax as possible, lifted the lid, and made a sound that was half gasp, half laugh, half sob. Inside the crate, wrapped in oilcloth that had kept the moisture out for over a century, were chunks of rock shot through with veins of silver that gleamed in the flashlight beam like frozen lightning. Elena had seen the samples Eleanor had shown her in town. Impressive specimens. Museum quality, Eleanor had said, worth thousands of dollars each. These were better. The veins were thicker here, more concentrated. The silver did not just run through the rock in thin threads. It dominated the stone. Some of the pieces were more silver than granite. Some looked like someone had poured liquid metal into cracks and let it solidify. Eleanor lifted one chunk with both hands, holding it like something sacred, like something too precious to be touched by unworthy hands. This is wire silver, the purest form of natural silver that exists in nature. This single piece, just this one piece, is worth $10,000 at current prices. Maybe 15, maybe more depending on the buyer. She set it down gently and opened another crate, more of the same, even better in some cases. And another crate, and another, and another. Elena lost count somewhere around 30. Each crate packed with ore that gleamed in the darkness like captured starlight. Each one representing weeks or months of Sarah's labor. Years of her life crystallized in stone and silver. Eleanor moved through the chamber in a daze, examining samples, making notes in her field book with hands that had stopped trembling because there was no room for nervousness anymore. Only wonder. only the kind of joy that comes from witnessing something you never thought you would see. Finally, she stopped, turned to face Elena. Her face in the flashlight beam was transformed, the face of someone who had just witnessed a miracle. I need to revise my estimate. Her voice was steady despite everything, the scientist in her taking over even as the human being struggled to comprehend. This is not 18 to $25 million. This cash alone, just what is in these crates, just what Sarah processed and stored, is worth 12 to 15 million at current silver prices. Conservative estimate. She gestured toward the tunnel that continued beyond the chamber, disappearing into darkness that their lights could not penetrate. But this is just what she extracted, just what she pulled out of the rock and refined. If the vein continues at this quality, if there is more silver still waiting in the stone. She paused, made sure Elena was listening, made sure she understood. We are talking $30 million, possibly more, possibly much more. The number hung in the air between them like something physical. $30 million, 800 years of Elena's teaching salary, enough to buy houses and cars and college educations and everything Sophie had ever been denied. Enough to never worry about money again. Enough to tell Derek and Caroline and Nathan and everyone else who had ever looked down on her to go straight to hell. Elena sat down heavily on one of the crates. Her legs had stopped working reliably. The world had tilted on its axis and she needed a moment to find her balance. Sophie could go to any college she wanted, could have a bedroom of her own, a house of her own, a life free from the constant grinding fear of not having enough. Could stop learning to sleep in cars and hide from security guards and pretend that everything was fine when everything was falling apart. $30 million. But even as the number echoed in her mind, even as she imagined what it could buy and build and change, Elena remembered her grandmother's letter, remembered the warning that had come with the gift. How you use it will define who you are. This is not just money. This is a 150-year promise. There is more. Eleanor's voice cut through Elena's thoughts. The tunnel continues beyond this chamber. And according to Sarah's journal, there are other chambers, one marked as water source and one marked as sacred place. Sacred place? Eleanor handed Elena the thick journal from the workbench, open to a page near the middle where a ribbon marked an important passage. Read this, Sarah's handwriting, more confident here than in the earlier journal, the writing of someone who had found her purpose and her power. Dated August 12, 1807. Met today with a Ute elder. His name is Gray Eagle. He knew I was here, knew about my mining, expected anger or violence or the kind of hostility that white men had shown his people for decades. Instead, he showed me kindness. He took me deeper into the mountain, through passages I had not discovered, to chambers his people have used for generations beyond counting, places where young men came to become warriors, where women came to pray for healthy children, where ancestors left offerings to spirits I do not understand but have learned to respect. I felt ashamed standing there, ashamed of my pickaxe and my greed, ashamed of what my presence in these mountains represented. Gray Eagle did not condemn me. He said the earth gives what it gives, that silver was meant to be found by someone, and perhaps it was better that I found it than others who would have been less careful with the land. But he asked me to make a promise. If I profit from this silver, I will protect what his people left in these chambers. I will keep it safe from those who would steal it or destroy it, and I will return it to his descendants when the time is right. I gave my word. It is the least I can do. This woman who has been rejected by everyone, who has been told she belongs nowhere, who has built her life in the spaces between worlds. This man showed me kindness when he had every reason to hate me. His promise is a debt I will pay even if it takes the rest of my life. Elena turned the page with trembling hands. The next entry was dated a week later. I have hidden everything Gray Eagle showed me, built a wall of stones that looks like natural rockfall. Only someone who knew exactly what to look for would recognize it as construction. His people can reclaim their sacred objects when the time is right, when the world is ready to give back what was stolen, when keeping promises matters more than profit. I have also hidden my best silver samples behind the same wall. If greedy men come searching, they will find enough in this main chamber to satisfy them. But the real treasure, both the sacred objects and the finest ore, will remain safe. Let these pages testify for anyone who comes after me. I broke no laws, harmed no one, and I kept my word to a man who showed me kindness when kindness was rare. Elena closed the journal and looked at Eleanor. We need to find the sacred chamber. The northern tunnel was narrower than the main shaft. Elena had to duck in places where the ceiling dropped to barely 5 feet. The rock changed as they progressed, granite giving way to something older and darker. Limestone, maybe. Stone that absorbed their flashlight beams instead of reflecting them. The air grew colder, damper. The sound of dripping water grew louder. 300 feet in, they found the wall. It looked natural at first glance, a pile of rocks and rubble that might have fallen from the ceiling during some ancient earthquake. The kind of obstacle that would make most explorers turn back, assuming the passage was blocked. But Elena's eye caught the pattern, the way the stones were stacked, the unnatural regularity of their arrangement, the absence of dust and debris that would have accumulated naturally over a century. Sarah had built this wall to hide something, and she had built it well. They worked together for 2 hours, removing stones one at a time, stacking them carefully against the tunnel walls. The work was slow and exhausting. Elena's shoulders screamed. Her hands were scraped raw despite the gloves Eleanor had provided. But she kept working because she knew what waited on the other side. Sophie had stayed at her post, had kept watch despite the fear and the cold and the desperate desire to know what was happening underground. Elena would not let that sacrifice be wasted. The last stone came free, and cool air rushed out from the darkness beyond. Air that smelled different, older, charged with something Elena could not name but could definitely feel. She aimed her flashlight through the gap and saw something that stopped her heart. A chamber, natural, not carved, maybe 15 feet across and 10 feet high. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like stone icicles, formed over thousands of years by water dripping through limestone. The floor was covered with fine dust that had not been disturbed in over a century. But it was what filled the chamber that made Elena forget to breathe. Pottery. Dozens of pieces, some intact, some fragments, all decorated with geometric patterns in black and red that told stories in a language Elena could not read. Woven baskets, perfectly preserved by the dry air of the underground. Beaded items in patterns that would have taken months to create. Tools made from bone and stone, carved with skill that spoke of generations of accumulated knowledge. And against the far wall, a stone altar, flat-topped and carved with symbols that predated European contact by centuries. Offerings had been placed there once. Most had crumbled to dust. But the altar itself remained. A holy place, a sacred place, a place where people had come for hundreds of years to pray and sacrifice and seek guidance from something larger than themselves. Dear God, Eleanor's voice was barely audible. This is a Ute ceremonial site. These artifacts are priceless. Not in terms of money, though collectors would pay millions. Priceless because they cannot be replaced. Because they represent a culture that was nearly destroyed. Because they belong to people who have been waiting over 100 years to get them back. Elena moved into the chamber like someone entering a church. She knelt beside a basket that held personal items, a beaded necklace, a stone knife with a wrapped handle, things that had belonged to someone specific, things that carried stories and memories and grief. At the bottom of the basket, wrapped in leather so old it crumbled at her touch, were 3 pages torn from Sarah's journal. The pages she had mentioned in her entry, the testimony she had left for whoever came after. Elena held them up to her flashlight and read, "Gray Eagle came to me again today. He is dying, he knows it. I know it. The sickness that has been killing his people for decades has finally found him. He asked me to promise again, to keep protecting what his people left here, to return it to them when the time is right, when his grandchildren's grandchildren come looking for what was lost. I promised, again and again, as many times as he needed to hear it. Because a promise given is a debt owed, and I pay my debts. That is who I am. That is all I have in this world where I belong nowhere and to no one." The second page was dated years later. I asked Gray Eagle how I would know when the time was right. How would I recognize the moment to return what I had protected? He said I would not know, but someone in my bloodline would. A daughter of my daughters, he said. She will come when the world is ready to listen, when the old ways are valued again, when keeping your word matters more than all the silver and all the mountains. I do not know if I believe in prophecy. I have seen too much cruelty to believe the universe has a plan. But I believe in promises, and I will keep this one until I cannot keep it anymore. Then I will pass it to someone else, and they will keep it after me. The third page was dated decades later. Sarah's handwriting was shakier now, the writing of an old woman near the end of her journey. 50 years. I have kept this secret for 50 years. Have worked this mine alone. Have protected the sacred chamber. Have told no one what lies beneath my cabin. I am dying now. Can feel it in my bones like I felt the silver in the stone all those years ago. But before I go, I must pass this burden to someone else. My granddaughter Rose shows promise. She has the strength I had at her age. The stubbornness, the understanding that some things matter more than money or comfort or the approval of others. I will tell her everything, and I will make her promise, as I promised Gray Eagle, to keep protecting what is here until the right moment comes. Your word is your wealth. Everything else is just metal in the ground. Elena set the pages down. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes were wet with tears she had not felt forming. 5 generations. Sarah to Rose. Rose to Maggie. Maggie to Elena. Each one carrying the same promise. Each one protecting the same sacred trust. Each one passing the burden forward until it reached someone who could finally fulfill it. And now the choice was hers. She could take the silver. $30 million, more than enough to change her life forever. More than enough to destroy Derek and Caroline in court. More than enough to give Sophie everything she deserved. But the sacred objects were not hers to take, were not hers to sell or display or profit from. They belonged to people who had been pushed off their land and nearly destroyed. People whose children had been stolen, whose language had been forbidden, whose sacred places had been desecrated. People who had been waiting for over 100 years for someone to keep a promise. We need to contact the tribe. Elena's voice was steady despite the tears. Before we do anything else, before we touch any more of this, we need to find the descendants of Gray Eagle's people and tell them what is here. They emerged from this mine into afternoon sunlight that felt too bright after hours in darkness. Elena's eyes watered as they adjusted. Her muscles ached. Her hands throbbed where the stones had scraped them raw. But she felt different. Lighter somehow. Like a burden she had not known she was carrying had been lifted. Sophie ran toward them from her position in the trees, her face tight with worry that dissolved into relief when she saw them climbing out of the trap door. You were gone forever. I was so scared. I kept watching the road and listening for sounds, and I did not know if something had happened to you. Elena pulled her daughter into a hug that lasted longer than any hug should. I know, I am sorry, but we found it. We found what great-great-grandmother Sarah hid. Is it treasure? Elena thought about the silver, about the sacred chamber, about the promise that had been kept for 158 years. Yes, but not the kind of treasure you are thinking of. Before she could explain further, she heard engines. Multiple engines. Coming up the road. Coming fast. Elena grabbed Sophie's hand and pushed her toward the tree line. Hide, now. Do not come out until I say it is safe, no matter what you hear. Sophie ran without argument. 7 months of survival had taught her when to obey instantly and when to ask questions later. Elena turned toward the road as the first vehicle appeared through the trees. A black Mercedes SUV. Expensive. Obscenely out of place on the rutted dirt road. It pulled into the clearing and parked with the aggressive confidence of someone who believed they owned everything they saw and everyone they met. The door opened and Derek stepped out. Behind him came a second vehicle. A white BMW sedan that had no business being anywhere near these mountains. Caroline emerged from the driver's side, her heels sinking into the dirt, her face twisted with disgust at the primitive conditions. And behind them both, a black pickup truck that Elena recognized immediately. Victor Mercer, completing the triumvirate of threat. Derek approached Elena with the smile of someone who had already won the game before it started. He wore a suit that cost more than Elena's car. His shoes were Italian leather, now covered in mountain dust. In his hand, he carried a folder thick with legal papers. Little sister, we need to talk. How did you find me? GPS tracker. Derek's smile widened. Caroline had one of her investigators planted on your Honda while you were at the will reading. We have known exactly where you were the entire time. Every parking lot you slept in, every diner you visited, every mile of this foolish journey to a worthless property. Elena felt ice spread through her chest. They had been watching her, tracking her, knowing she was homeless and doing nothing to help while they documented her suffering for use as a weapon. Carolyn walked up beside Derek, her own folder in hand. Her smile was thinner, more controlled. the smile of a lawyer who smelled blood in the water. Elena, this has gone far enough. You are homeless, living in your car with a 9-year-old child. That alone raises serious questions about your fitness as a parent. She opened her folder and pulled out photographs. Elena saw herself sleeping in the Honda, Sophie eating a granola bar in the back seat, the Walmart parking lot at night with the car barely visible in the shadows. Every humiliation documented, every moment of desperation captured. We have comprehensive documentation. Statements from your ex-husband about the unstable living situation. Testimony from neighbors about your erratic behavior before the divorce. A psychological profile suggesting possible depression and anxiety. She spread the photographs on the hood of Derek's Mercedes like evidence in a trial. A judge would be very interested in all of this. You are threatening to take my daughter. We are presenting facts. Caroline's voice was cold, professional, the voice of someone who had destroyed people in courtrooms for years and enjoyed every moment. You cannot provide a stable home for a child. We can. Derek has resources. I have connections. Sophie would be better off with family who can actually care for her. Derek held up his hand, playing the reasonable one, playing the role he had practiced. We do not want to go that route. We really do not. Sophie is family. We want what is best for her. He held up his folder. So here is what we are offering. Sign over the property, all 40 acres, everything on it, everything under it, every right to mineral extraction, timber, water, and development. In exchange, you receive $100,000 in cash, enough to get an apartment, get stable, find a job, keep Sophie. His smile was the smile of a predator offering terms to prey, or refuse, and we will destroy you in court. For the property first, then for custody. You cannot afford that fight, Elena. We can afford to keep it going until you have nothing left, not even your daughter. Victor Mercer had been hanging back, watching the siblings work. Now he stepped forward, his presence adding a different kind of threat, the kind that did not need lawyers or courtrooms, the kind that operated in shadows and left no witnesses. I would take the offer if I were you. His voice was pleasant, almost friendly, but his eyes were the eyes of something that had stopped being human a long time ago. Mountains are dangerous places. Things happen to people who do not know when to walk away. Accidents, disappearances, the kind of tragedies that never get solved because there are no witnesses and no evidence and no one to ask uncomfortable questions. He looked at the cabin, at the open trap door, at Elena standing alone against all three of them. Your grandmother turned down my offers for 15 years. She was stubborn, impossible to reason with, but she is gone now, and you are alone here with a 9-year-old girl and no one who would miss you if something unfortunate happened. Is that a threat? Elena's voice came out steadier than she felt, steadier than she had any right to feel. Victor smiled, the smile of someone who had done terrible things and would do them again without hesitation. Just reality. Think carefully about your choices. You have 48 hours until the court hearing. After that, otosh, things get complicated for everyone. Derek held out a pen. Sign the papers, Elena. Take the money. Walk away while you still have something to walk away to. Elena looked at the pen, at the papers, at her brother and sister who were willing to threaten her daughter to get what they wanted, at Victor Mercer, who had killed before and would kill again without losing a moment of sleep. She thought about the silver in the chamber below. $30 million, more than enough to fight them, more than enough to hire lawyers and investigators and security, more than enough to destroy everyone who had tried to destroy her. But she also thought about the sacred chamber, about the artifacts that belonged to Gray Eagle's descendants, about the promise Sarah had made and Rose had kept and Maggie had died protecting. If she signed these papers, Victor Mercer would get the mine. He would tear apart the sacred chamber looking for more silver. He would sell the artifacts to collectors or destroy them entirely. 158 years of promise-keeping would end in betrayal. No, the word came out quiet but absolute. A word that could not be taken back. Derek's smile faltered. What? No, I am not signing anything. This property is mine. What is under it is mine, and I will not let you or Victor Mercer or anyone else take it from me. Derek's face hardened into something ugly. You are making a serious mistake. Maybe, but it is my mistake to make. Carolyn stepped forward, her courtroom voice cold and precise. Monday morning, 9 a.m. We will see you in court, and we will see Sophie and Family Services before the week is out. Think about that while you are sleeping in your car tonight. They left the way they had come, expensive vehicles bouncing over the rutted road, disappearing into the trees, leaving silence behind. Eleanor emerged from behind the cabin where she had been watching through the window. I heard everything. Those people are actually your family? Elena laughed. The sound was hollow, empty. Blood family. Not real family. Real family does not threaten to take your child to get what they want. Sophie appeared from the trees, running to Elena and burying her face in her mother's chest. I heard what they said about taking me away. They cannot do that, can they? They cannot take me from you. Elena held her daughter tight, did not answer, because she did not know. That night, Elena sat on the cabin porch while Sophie slept in the car. The stars were impossibly bright, the kind of stars you only saw in places where light pollution did not exist. Eleanor had gone back to town to make calls, to contact the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe's Cultural Preservation Office, to find Samuel Brooks, the lawyer Ruth had mentioned, to gather allies for the fight ahead. Sophie emerged from the car, wrapped in coats, unable to sleep. She sat down beside her mother and looked up at the stars. Mom, if we keep the promise to great-great-grandmother Sarah, if we protect the sacred things and give them back to the tribe, do we lose everything? Elena did not answer immediately. Maybe, I do not know. Sophie was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that made Elena's heart break and swell with pride at the same time. I think we should keep the promise anyway, because that is who we are. That is who you taught me to be. They sat together until the cold drove them back to the car. Elena wrapped her arms around her daughter and tried to sleep. 48 hours, that was all she had. But somewhere in the darkness, she began to form a plan. A way to change the game entirely. A way to make this fight about something bigger than money. Tomorrow she would find Thomas Running Bear at the Tribal Preservation Office. Tomorrow she would begin keeping the promise Sarah Blackwood had made 158 years ago. Tomorrow everything would change. Your word is your wealth. Everything else is just metal in the ground. Elena finally understood what that meant, and she was ready to prove it. The drive to the Ute Mountain Ute Tribal headquarters took 4 hours through mountain passes that wound like snakes through terrain that had belonged to these people for thousands of years before anyone else arrived. Elena drove with Sophie sleeping in the passenger seat, exhausted from nights of fear and vigilance, and the weight of secrets too heavy for a 9-year-old to carry. The highway cut through valleys that had once held villages, past rivers that had sustained generations before the reservations, past mountains where sacred ceremonies had been performed for centuries before anyone thought to put a price on the land. Elena thought about Sarah Blackwood making a similar journey, not by car but by horse or foot, not on paved roads but through wilderness that could kill the unprepared. A half-breed woman in 1807 traveling to meet with people who had every reason to hate her, carrying nothing but a promise to make. Grey Eagle had shown her kindness when kindness was rare, had trusted her when trust was dangerous, had asked her to protect something sacred and believed that she would. And Sarah had, for 50 years, alone in the mountains with a secret worth killing for. Now Elena carried that same promise forward, into a different kind of wilderness, against different kinds of threats. But the core remained unchanged. Keep your word. Protect what you have been entrusted to protect. Do right even when wrong would be easier. Eleanor had made the call the night before, had spoken to someone named Thomas Running Bear, who served as the tribe's cultural preservation director, had explained enough to get Elena an audience, but not so much that the information could be intercepted or leaked. We have been waiting, Thomas had said through the phone. For 7 years we have been waiting. Maggie Hartwell told us this day would come. The tribal headquarters occupied a modern building that somehow managed to honor tradition while existing firmly in the present. Glass and steel and native stonework blended together. The grounds held gardens planted with traditional crops. Signs in both English and Ute marked the pathways. Elena parked the Honda and sat for a moment, gathering courage. What she was about to do would change everything. Would set in motion forces she could not control. Would either save her or destroy her, with no middle ground possible. Sophie stirred awake and looked at the building through the windshield. Is this where the tribe lives? This is their government center, where they make decisions and keep records and protect their culture. Are they going to help us? I hope so, baby. I really hope so. Thomas Running Bear met them in the lobby. He was 55 years old, with gray threading through black hair and eyes that assessed before offering trust. He wore a modern suit, but with a bolo tie featuring turquoise that had probably been in his family for generations. A man straddling two worlds, like Sarah Blackwood, had straddled two worlds 158 years ago. Elena Hartwell, Maggie's granddaughter. His handshake was firm, but not aggressive. The handshake of someone who had learned patience through decades of fighting battles that most people did not even know were being waged. Thank you for seeing us. Your grandmother was a friend to this tribe. She contacted us 7 years ago, told us what she had been protecting, showed us photographs of artifacts we thought were lost forever. He gestured for them to follow him down a hallway lined with photographs of tribal elders past and present, men and women who had fought to preserve something against impossible odds. We have been waiting for this day, waiting for the right person to finish what Sarah Blackwood started. They entered a conference room where two older men already sat. Their faces were weathered by decades of sun and wind and the particular kind of grief that came from watching a culture nearly destroyed and then slowly, painfully rebuilt. Thomas made introductions. The elders were named Joseph Whitehorse and Samuel Greywolf. Both were in their 70s. Both had spent their lives working to recover what had been taken from their people. Elena spread Sarah's journal pages on the table. The photographs from the sacred chamber. The documentation Eleanor had prepared. Everything she had found beneath the cabin laid out for people who had the right to know. The elders examined each item in silence. Their hands trembled as they touched the photographs. One of them, Joseph, made a sound that was half sob, half prayer when he saw the image of the stone altar. This belonged to my great-grandmother. His voice cracked. She spoke of a sacred chamber, said her grandmother had prayed there before the soldiers came. We thought it was lost, destroyed, buried under mining operations that cared nothing for what they were desecrating. It is still there. Elena's voice was steady. Everything is still there. Sarah Blackwood protected it for 50 years. My grandmother protected it for 70 more. Now I am here to give it back. Thomas leaned forward. Your brother and sister are contesting the will. They have filed for property seizure. The hearing is tomorrow morning. I know. If they win, Victor Mercer gets access to the land. He has already partnered with them, already promised to share whatever profits come from mining the silver. I know that too. Thomas studied her face for a long moment. What do you want from us, Elena Hartwell? I want you to file an intervention. Federal heritage law protects sacred sites. The Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act gives you standing. If the tribe asserts interest in the property, the court has to consider that before ruling on seizure. Samuel Greywolf spoke for the first time. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. You are asking us to enter a legal battle that could take years, could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, could end in defeat despite everything. I am asking you to help me keep a promise that my family has kept for 158 years. Silence filled the room. The elders looked at each other, communicating in the wordless way of people who have known each other for decades. Finally, Joseph Whitehorse spoke. Your ancestor Sarah, she was half Ute, White River Band. Her mother was taken from our people as a child, raised among whites, but the blood was still there. He looked at Elena with eyes that saw more than she was showing. That blood is in you, in your daughter. You are not outsiders coming to us with charity. You are family coming home with something that was borrowed and is now being returned. The documents were signed within the hour. Emergency intervention papers filed electronically before the courts closed for the day. The tribe's lawyers, experienced in federal heritage cases, began preparing arguments that would shift the entire nature of the conflict. This is no longer about money, Thomas explained as Elena prepared to leave. This is no longer about who inherits what. This is about sacred sites and ancestral artifacts and the federal government's obligation to protect indigenous heritage. Your brother and sister wanted a fight about property values. They are about to get a fight about something much bigger. Elena drove back to Copperfield as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in colors that had no names in English. Sophie watched the light change and asked questions about the tribe, about Sarah Blackwood, about what it meant to be part of something larger than yourself. They arrived at the cabin after dark. Eleanor was waiting with news. Samuel Brooks will represent you tomorrow. Pro bono. He says any friend of Maggie's is a friend of his, and he has experience with mineral rights cases that makes him perfect for this fight. Elena felt something loosen in her chest. For the first time since the will reading, she was not completely alone. That night, she could not sleep. She sat on the cabin porch and watched the stars wheel overhead and thought about the morning, about the courtroom, about facing Derek and Caroline and Victor Mercer with nothing but the truth and a promise kept across 5 generations. She thought about her grandmother, about all the times Maggie had called when no one else did, all the times she had said, "I believe in you," when everyone else had given up, all the times she had listened without judgment and offered comfort without conditions. Maggie had known this day would come, had spent 7 years preparing for it, had chosen Elena specifically because she understood something about her youngest grandchild that Derek and Caroline would never grasp. Elena finally understood what that something was. It was not about success or failure, not about wealth or poverty, not about the things the world used to measure worth. It was about keeping your word when keeping it cost everything. It was about being someone who could be trusted even when no one was watching. It was about understanding that some things mattered more than money. The courtroom was smaller than Elena had expected. Wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lights and the American flag hanging limply in a corner. The kind of space where ordinary people's lives were decided by strangers in black robes. Judge Martha Morrison presided from the bench. She was 65 years old with silver hair, pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that had seen every trick lawyers could play and was not impressed by any of them. She had been on the bench for 30 years and had a reputation for fairness that bordered on ruthlessness. Derek and Caroline sat at the plaintiff's table with Stanley Richter, their attorney. Richter was Denver's most expensive litigator. $3,000 suits and a smile that never reached his eyes. He had built his career on winning cases that should have been lost, usually by finding weaknesses in opponents who could not afford to fight back. Victor Mercer sat in the gallery, watching with the patience of a predator who knew the kill was coming. Elena sat at the defendant's table with Samuel Brooks. Sam was 62 years old, weathered by mountain living, with hands that showed decades of hard work despite his law degree. He wore a suit that was clean but not expensive. His briefcase was leather-worn soft by years of use, but his eyes were sharp, and his preparation was meticulous. And he had spent the previous night reviewing every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence that could turn this case. Also in the gallery sat Thomas Running Bear and the 2 tribal elders. Their presence had already disrupted Derek's plans. Richter had spent 20 minutes before the hearing trying to get them excluded, arguing that they had no standing, that this was a family matter, that indigenous interests were irrelevant to a will contest. Judge Morrison had denied every motion. "We will hear all relevant parties," she had said, "and relevance will be determined by this court, not by the plaintiff's preferences." The hearing began with Richter's opening statement. He was smooth and confident, laying out the case with the precision of someone who had done this hundreds of times. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter of testamentary capacity. Margaret Hartwell was 94 years old when she executed this will. She had shown signs of cognitive decline for years. She made irrational decisions, including leaving the bulk of her valuable property to a granddaughter who was demonstrably unable to manage it." He gestured toward Elena without looking at her. "The defendant is homeless, living in her car with a minor child. She has no stable employment, no savings, no ability to maintain or develop the property in question. Meanwhile, she received essentially nothing of monetary value while her siblings received millions. This distribution makes no sense unless we accept that Mrs. Hartwell was not of sound mind when she made these decisions." Sam's response was quieter but equally precise. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that Margaret Hartwell had full mental capacity when executing her will. Medical records confirm this. Her attorney confirms this. And her own words, recorded on video 2 weeks before her death, confirm this beyond any reasonable doubt." The plaintiff wants to reduce this case to dollars and cents. But Mrs. Hartwell was not thinking about dollars and cents. She was thinking about legacy, about promises kept across generations, about finding the right person to continue protecting something she had guarded for 70 years. Elena Hartwell is that person, not because she is wealthy, not because she is successful by conventional measures, but because she has demonstrated the character her grandmother was looking for. Derek testified first. He described Maggie's supposed confusion in her final years, repeated stories, forgotten names, moments of apparent disorientation. His delivery was polished, rehearsed, designed to paint a picture of a woman losing her grip on reality. He spoke about times Maggie had called him by their father's name, about a conversation where she seemed to forget that her husband had been dead for decades, about the time she had gotten lost driving to a grocery store she had visited hundreds of times. Each anecdote was crafted to suggest decline. each story positioned to support the narrative that Maggie had not been competent to make the decision she made. Elena listened and recognized some truth in what Derek said. Maggie had been 94 years old. She had moments of confusion. Everyone that age did. But there was a difference between occasional forgetfulness and legal incompetence. A difference between the normal wear of age and the inability to understand consequences. Derek was blurring that line, deliberately, skillfully, and if Elena had not known her grandmother, if she had not spent hours on the phone with a woman whose mind remained sharp even as her body failed, she might have believed him. Sam's cross-examination was surgical. Mr. Hartwell, how many times did you visit your grandmother in her final 2 years? Derek shifted in his seat, perhaps 5 or 6 times. 5 or 6 times in 24 months. And based on this limited contact, you claim expertise regarding her mental state? I also consulted with her physicians. Did any physician diagnose dementia or cognitive impairment? Not formally, but the symptoms were clear. So your claim rests on your interpretation during occasional visits, not on any medical diagnosis. Derek's composure cracked slightly. My grandmother left my sister essentially nothing while giving us millions. That is not rational behavior. Sam introduced Maggie's medical records. Cognitive tests showing normal function for her age. Neurological examinations revealing no impairment. Detailed notes from her physician describing a patient who was alert, oriented, and fully competent to make legal decisions. Carolyn testified next. She focused on Elena's homelessness as evidence of poor judgment and inability to manage property. She is living in her car with a 9-year-old child. That is not someone capable of managing a multi-million-dollar property. That is someone who needs intervention, not inheritance. Sam's cross was equally direct. Ms. Hartwell-Webb, when did you learn your sister was homeless? A few months ago. Her ex-husband mentioned it. What did you do to help? Caroline's jaw tightened. I offered advice, but no financial assistance, no offer of temporary housing, no help of any practical kind. She did not ask. Did she need to ask? She is your sister. Your niece was sleeping in a parking lot. Sam paused, letting the silence do its work. You have a guest room in your home. Unused. Your brother has a penthouse with 3 empty bedrooms. But neither of you offered shelter to a family member in crisis. And now you are here asking this court to take from her the one thing she was given. The tribal intervention came next. Thomas Running Bear took the stand and explained the sacred chamber, the artifacts, the federal heritage protections that applied. He described Maggie's 7-year negotiation with the tribe, the draft agreement that demonstrated intentional planning rather than confused impulse. Mrs. Hartwell was thinking very clearly. She knew exactly what she was protecting and why. She was waiting for the right person to complete what Sarah Blackwood started 158 years ago. He looked at Derek and Caroline with eyes that held no anger. Anger, only disappointment. Your grandmother did not trust you with this responsibility. Not because she did not love you, but because she understood that you would not keep the promise. You would sell what should be returned. You would destroy what should be preserved. She chose Elena because Elena has proven she will do the right thing even when it costs everything. Richter objected repeatedly, tried to argue that indigenous heritage was irrelevant to a will contest, that the tribe had no standing, that sacred sites were a matter for federal courts, not probate judges. Judge Morrison overruled every objection. The relevance of this testimony goes to Mrs. Hartwell's state of mind when executing her will. If she was engaged in complex negotiations with federal stakeholders for 7 years, that suggests clarity of thought, not confusion. Continue, Mr. Running Bear. The afternoon session began with Sam's final piece of evidence. Your Honor, we have one remaining item, a video testament recorded by Margaret Hartwell 2 weeks before her death at her attorney's office, specifically to address the challenge she anticipated from her grandchildren. Richter objected immediately. Video testimony is prejudicial, potentially inadmissible. We have had no opportunity to depose the witness. Judge Morrison's voice was flat. The witness is deceased, Mr. Richter. That makes depositions somewhat difficult. The video is a testamentary document. It is admissible. We will view it now. The bailiff set up a screen, the lights dimmed slightly, and Margaret Hartwell appeared, sitting at a conference table, looking directly into the camera with eyes that held complete clarity. She was 94 years old, white hair pulled back, face lined by nearly a century of living. But her voice was strong and her gaze was steady, and there was nothing confused about the woman on the screen. My name is Margaret Hartwell. I am recording this of my own free will, with sound mind and clear intention, specifically to address what I know will be challenges to my testament for my grandchildren Derek and Carolyn. She paused, seeming to gather herself. They will contest. I have known them their whole lives. I love them, but I know them. They see the world through the lens of money and success and status. They measure worth by bank balances and job titles and the price tags on their possessions. They will not understand why I have made the choices I have made, so I will explain. Maggie leaned forward slightly, her intensity filling the screen. Derek built a $50 million company. Caroline made partner at one of Denver's most prestigious law firms. I am proud of their achievements. Any grandmother would be. But those achievements did not require character. They required ambition, intelligence, ruthlessness, the willingness to sacrifice anything for success. Character is different. Character is what you do when no one is watching, what you choose when the easy path leads away from what is right, how you treat people who cannot help or hurt you. Derek and Caroline have never been tested. They have never faced real hardship, never had to choose between comfort and integrity, never discovered what they were made of when everything was stripped away. Maggie's voice softened. Elena is different. She faced poverty, divorce, homelessness. Her husband took everything and left her with nothing but a car and a daughter and the crushing weight of failure. But she did not break. She kept teaching, kept showing up for students who mostly did not care, kept believing that beauty mattered even when the world told her it did not, kept protecting Sophie's joy and innocence even when she had nothing left to protect herself. That is strength, real strength, the kind that does not show up on resumes or balance sheets. Maggie's eyes seemed to find Elena in the courtroom, even though the video had been recorded weeks before. The mountain property is not just land. It is not just silver. It is a promise my great-grandmother Sarah made to a Ute elder named Gray Eagle in 1867. A promise to protect sacred objects until they could be returned to his people. I have kept that promise for 70 years, waiting for the right person to complete it. Derek would sell to the highest bidder without a second thought. Caroline would turn it into legal complications that would take decades to resolve. Neither of them would keep the promise. Neither of them would even try. But Elena will, because Elena understands that some things matter more than money, that keeping your word is worth more than any inheritance, that the measure of a person is not what they accumulate, but what they protect. Maggie's final words rang through the silent courtroom. I am not leaving Elena less than her siblings. I am leaving her more. More responsibility, more trust, more faith that she will do what is right. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion that decades of self-control could not fully contain. When Elena was 12 years old, she found an injured bird in our backyard. Most children would have forgotten about it within an hour. Elena nursed that bird for 3 weeks, fed it with an eyedropper, built it a nest from grass and cotton, woke up in the middle of the night to check on it. The bird died anyway, and Elena cried for days, not because she had failed, but because something that depended on her was gone. That is who she is. Someone who cannot walk away from a responsibility once she accepts it. Someone who will break her own heart before she breaks a promise. Derek and Caroline do not have that. They never did. And I say that not to hurt them, but to explain why I have made the choices I have made. Maggie looked directly into the camera one final time. Stand firm, Elena. Keep the promise. Return what should be returned. And know that wherever I am proud of you. I have always been proudest of you. The screen went dark. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. Even Richter seemed unable to find words. Judge Morrison sat motionless for a long moment. Then she looked at Derek and Caroline with an expression that could have frozen water. I have heard enough. Her voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. The will contest is denied. Medical evidence overwhelmingly supports Margaret Hartwell's mental capacity. Her video testament demonstrates not confusion but exceptional clarity. She anticipated this challenge. She prepared for it. She explained her reasoning in detail. Furthermore, federal heritage law protections apply to this property. The Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act gives the Ute Mountain Ute tribe standing to intervene in any disposition of sacred sites. Dividing this property or transferring it to parties who would not honor existing agreements would violate federal law. She fixed Derek and Caroline with a stare that made both of them look away. Your grandmother's video makes clear she understood your characters quite well. You received substantial inheritances, more than enough for comfortable lives, but you came here trying to take what she specifically chose to give someone else. because you could not accept that she valued qualities you do not possess. The gavel fell. Will stands as written. Elena Hartwell is the sole legal owner of the Copper Ridge property and everything on or beneath it. Case dismissed with prejudice. Costs and attorney fees to be paid by the plaintiffs. The courtroom erupted in quiet celebration. Thomas Running Bear and the elders rose, approaching Elena with embraces that crossed cultural boundaries through shared victory. Eleanor gripped her shoulder. Sam gathered his papers with quiet satisfaction. Sophie, who had been sitting in the gallery with strict instructions to stay silent, ran to her mother and threw her arms around her. "We won, Mom, we won!" Elena held her daughter tight and tried to breathe through the relief flooding her body. They had won. Against Derek's money, against Caroline's connections, against Victor Mercer's threats. They had won. But victory, Elena was about to learn, was not the same as safety. Outside the courthouse, Derek caught up to her before she reached the parking structure. He looked different somehow, smaller, diminished by defeat in ways that had nothing to do with money. "I watched that video 20 times last night." His voice was hoarse, empty of the arrogance that usually filled it. "Grandma knew. She knew exactly what we would do. She predicted everything. She knew you for 42 years. She knew Caroline for 40. That is a lot of time to understand someone." Derek stared at the ground. "I built a company worth $50 million. Caroline made partner at one of the best firms in the state. We have everything anyone could want. But Grandma did not trust us. She trusted you. The sister we laughed at, the sister we refused to help, the sister we tracked like an animal and threatened to destroy." He looked up at Elena with something that might have been the beginning of understanding. "That hurts more than losing the property. Knowing that she saw us clearly. Knowing that she was right." Elena did not know what to say. She had spent months hating her siblings, months imagining this moment of vindication. But now that it was here, all she felt was tired. "You could be different. It is not too late." Derek laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I do not know how to be the person she saw in you. I do not know how to want things that cannot be bought. Start by showing up." Elena heard herself say the words before she knew she was going to speak them. Sophie's birthday is October 15th, 2 p.m. No expensive gifts. Just come. Be present. That is what she needs from an uncle. That is what any of us ever needed from you. Derek nodded slowly. Then he walked back toward his Mercedes, got in, and drove away. Caroline did not stop, did not speak, just got in her BMW and left without looking back. Some people could not change. Some people would not even try, and that was their choice to live with. Victor Mercer was the last to leave. He approached Elena in the parking structure, his face unreadable, his eyes holding the same emptiness they always held. "You won the battle. Congratulations." His voice was pleasant, almost friendly. "But we are not done." Elena felt her stomach clench. "During my years trying to acquire your grandmother's property, I accumulated certain assets. Debts, specifically. Outstanding obligations that various companies had purchased from original creditors." He pulled a document from his jacket and handed it to Elena. "Your credit card debt, the loans you took out during your divorce, the medical bills from when Sophie had pneumonia 2 years ago. $47,000 in total. I own all of it." Elena stared at the paper. The numbers blurred together. "These debts are callable, payable in full within 60 days. If you fail to pay, I have the right to pursue collection through any legal means available." He smiled. "Including seizure of your vehicle, the Honda you have been living in for 7 months. How is this legal? Debt purchasing is a billion-dollar industry. Perfectly legal, perfectly ruthless, and perfectly useful when you want leverage over someone who has nothing." Victor turned to leave, then paused. "Pay me the $47,000 within 60 days, or I take your car and leave you and your daughter truly homeless. No vehicle, no shelter, just the clothes on your backs and whatever sympathy you can find." He walked away. His footsteps echoed in the concrete structure long after he disappeared. Elena stood in the parking garage holding the document that contained her new nightmare. $47,000. She did not have $47. The trial had cost nothing because Sam worked pro bono, but $47,000 was impossible, unless she sold the silver. The thought came unbidden. The silver in the mine was worth $30 million. She could extract a tiny fraction, enough to pay Victor, enough to be free. But extracting silver meant mining, and Sarah's agreement with Gray Eagle had been clear. Take only what you need to survive. No commercial extraction, no profit beyond basic sustenance. For 50 years, Sarah had honored that agreement. For 70 years, Maggie had honored it. They had lived simply, had never touched the vast wealth beneath their feet, had understood that the promise mattered more than the money. Elena had just won the right to continue that legacy. And now Victor Mercer was forcing her to choose between the promise and survival. She drove back to Copperfield in a daze. Sophie chattered happily about the trial, about the judge's ruling, about how Uncle Derek had looked when the video played. She did not know about Victor's threat, did not understand that their victory was already turning to ash. That night, Elena sat with Eleanor and Thomas Running Bear in the cabin and explained the situation. He owns my debt, all of it, $47,000 due in 60 days. Thomas's face was grim. Victor Mercer has done this before. He acquires leverage over people who cannot fight back, uses it to force them out of properties he wants. It is not illegal, but it is predatory. What are my options? You could declare bankruptcy. That would discharge the debt, but destroy your credit for years. I do not have credit to destroy. I have been living in my car. You could try to negotiate, offer to pay a portion over time. He would never accept that. He does not want the money. He wants the property. Eleanor spoke carefully. There is another option. The silver samples we documented are worth $4 to $6 million. If we sold them to a museum or collector with full provenance and documentation, you would have more than enough to pay Victor and have millions left over. Elena shook her head. Sarah's agreement was clear. No commercial extraction, no profit beyond basic sustenance. The silver stays in the mountain. But the samples are already extracted. Sarah removed them over 100 years ago. You would not be mining anything new. It is the same thing. Selling that silver for profit violates the spirit of what Sarah promised. Thomas Running Bear had been silent. Now he spoke. Gray Eagle made that agreement because he did not trust white men to keep their word, because he had seen what happened when promises were broken. His people lost everything because treaties were violated, because sacred sites were desecrated, because greed always won. He looked at Elena with something like reverence. You are willing to lose everything rather than break a promise made to a man who died 150 years ago. A man you never met, a man whose people have been treated with cruelty by every generation of your family's neighbors. That is not stupid. That is not naive. That is the most honorable thing I have witnessed in 60 years of fighting for my people. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkness. There may be another way. Let me make some calls. The next morning, Thomas returned with news. The tribe has resources, a cultural preservation fund. We cannot pay your debts directly, but we can purchase something from you legally. What could I possibly sell you? Access rights. The sacred chamber and its artifacts belong to our people, but they are on your land. We would need formal access agreements to retrieve and preserve what Sarah protected. Those agreements have a value. We are prepared to pay $50,000 for a 20-year access and preservation easement. That is more than my debt. Consider the extra a retainer. We will need ongoing cooperation as we document and relocate the artifacts. This is not charity. This is a business transaction between parties with mutual interests. Elena felt tears forming. You are saving me. Wait up. Because you kept a promise no one would have blamed you for breaking. Because you chose honor over wealth when wealth was handed to you on a silver platter. Thomas smiled. And because Gray Eagle told Sarah that a daughter of her daughters would come when the time was right. When keeping your word mattered more than all the silver in all the mountains. He was describing you. 158 years ago, he saw you coming, and he asked Sarah to keep that promise until you arrived. Now you have, and we keep our promises too. The agreement was signed the next day. $50,000 transferred to an account Elena had opened that morning. Victor Mercer was paid in full before his 60-day deadline. The debt that had been a weapon became nothing. And Elena made a decision. The silver would stay in the mountain, all $30 million of it. She would not extract it, would not sell it, would not profit from what Sarah had found beyond the basic sustenance the original agreement allowed. It would have been so easy to justify taking more. The agreement was made with a man who had been dead for over a century. His tribe had been pushed onto reservations, their land stolen, their children taken to schools designed to erase their identity. No one would have blamed Elena for concluding that circumstances had changed, that promises made in 1867 could not reasonably bind someone in the 21st century. But that was not what Sarah would have done. That was not what Maggie would have done, And it was not what Elena would do. Because the promise was not really about Grey Eagle or his descendants. It was not even really about the sacred artifacts or the silver. It was about who Elena chose to be. What kind of person she wanted to see in the mirror. What kind of example she wanted to set for Sophie. The world was full of people who broke promises when it was convenient. Full of people who found reasons why their circumstances were special. Why the rules did not apply to them, and why integrity was a luxury they could not afford. Elena refused to be one of those people. The tribe would retrieve their sacred artifacts. Elena would maintain the property. And the silver would remain where it had been for 158 years, waiting for some future generation to decide its fate. Maybe Sophie would mine it someday. Maybe Sophie's children would. Or maybe they would make the same choice Elena was making, generation after generation, proving that some promises were strong enough to outlast the people who made them. Sophie asked about it that night as they sat on the porch of the cabin that was finally, legally, undeniably theirs. Mom, there is $30 million under our feet. Why are we not taking it? Because great-great-grandmother Sarah promised she would not. She would take enough to survive, but no more. That was her agreement with Grey Eagle. But she is dead. Grey Eagle is dead. No one would know if we took more. Elena pulled her daughter close. We would know, and that is what matters. Keeping your word when no one is watching. Doing right when wrong is easier. That is what Sarah did for 50 years. That is what Grandma Maggie did for 70 years. That is what we are going to do. Sophie was quiet for a moment. So we are going to stay not rich? Even though we could be rich? We are going to stay honest. We are going to keep the promise. And we are going to prove that some things matter more than money. She kissed the top of Sophie's head. Your word is your wealth. Everything else is just metal in the ground. Sophie leaned into her mother's embrace. I like that. Can I tell my kids someday when I have kids? You can tell them, and you can show them, by being someone who keeps her promises no matter what. The stars wheeled overhead. The mountain held its secrets. And Elena Hartwell finally understood what her grandmother had seen in her. Not weakness, not failure, not the inability to succeed by the world's standards. Strength. The quiet kind, the kind that did not need applause or recognition. The kind that simply did what was right, day after day, year after year, generation after generation. Sarah Blackwood had that strength. Maggie Hartwell had that strength. And now Elena carried it forward. $30 million in silver would stay in the ground. A promise made in 1870 would continue to be kept. And a 9-year-old girl sleeping in her mother's arms would grow up knowing that integrity was worth more than any fortune. That was the real inheritance. That was what Maggie had left her. Not money, not property, not even the silver. The knowledge that she was worthy of trust, and the proof that she had earned it. 6 months passed like water through fingers, fast in some moments, slow in others, but always moving forward, always carrying Elena and Sophie towards something new. The apartment was nothing special. 3 bedrooms in a building that had been built in the 1970s and renovated just enough to stay functional. The carpet was beige, the walls were off-white, the kitchen had appliances that worked but would never appear in a magazine. The neighbors were a mix of elderly couples on fixed incomes and young families just starting out. But it was theirs. Elena had paid 6 months' rent in advance with the money from the tribal access agreement, had signed a lease with her own name, not as a co-signer or a dependent or a charity case, had watched the property manager hand her keys that opened doors to rooms that belonged to her and Sophie and no one else. The day they moved in, Elena had stood in the doorway for a long time, just looking, just breathing, just letting the reality sink in that she would not have to look for a new parking lot tonight, would not have to calculate how much gas she needed to keep the heat running, would not have to wake at 3 in the morning when security guards knocked on the window. Sophie had stood in the doorway of her bedroom for 10 minutes without moving, just staring at the space, at the window that looked out over a parking lot that was somehow beautiful because she did not have to sleep in it, at the closet that could hold clothes instead of plastic bins, at the bed that would not move when she rolled over in the night. Mom, this is mine. Her voice had cracked on the word mine. 9 years old, and she had never had a room of her own. Had shared with Elena in the house Nathan took. Had shared the back seat of the Honda for 7 months after that. Had learned to make herself small, to take up as little space as possible, to exist in the margins of other people's lives. Now she had walls, a door, a window, a closet, a bed that did not fold down from a car seat, a space that was hers alone. It is yours, baby. All yours. You can paint it whatever color you want. Put up whatever posters you want. Make it yours in whatever way feels right. Sophie had walked slowly into the room, had touched the walls with both hands, feeling their solidity, had opened the closet and looked inside at the empty hangers waiting to hold her clothes, had sat on the bed and bounced once, twice, 3 times, testing its reality, making sure it would not disappear. Then she had closed the door. Elena had stood in the hallway and listened to her daughter cry. Not sad crying, not the muffled sobs that Sophie had learned to hide during months of homelessness. This was different. This was release. This was 7 months of fear and uncertainty and desperate hope finally finding an outlet. This was grief for what had been lost and joy for what had been found, mixed together in a sound that was not quite laughter and not quite weeping, but somehow both at once. Elena had cried too, standing in the hallway of their new apartment, listening to her daughter process everything they had survived, tears running down her face without any attempt to stop them, because they were safe now, because they had made it, because against everything and everyone they had found their way to solid ground. They had made it, against everything, against Derek and Caroline Shane and Victor Mercer, against a system that made homelessness a crime and poverty a moral failing, against a world that measured worth in dollars and found Elena wanting. They had made it. The teaching position at Henderson High remained unchanged. Elena had returned after spring break to find her classroom exactly as she had left it. Student work on the walls, supplies organized in their proper places, the smell of paint and turpentine and possibility filling the air. Principal Martinez had called her into his office the first day back. He was a large man with kind eyes and a reputation for protecting his teachers from bureaucratic nonsense. I heard about your situation. The inheritance, the legal battle. He had leaned back in his chair and studied her. Word is you came into some money. Some, not as much as people think. Enough to not need this job anymore? Elena had considered the question carefully before answering. I do not need the salary, but I need the work. These kids need someone who believes they can make beautiful things even when the world tells them they are worthless. I am qualified for that particular lesson. Martinez had smiled. Good, because your students asked about you every day you were gone, even the ones who pretend not to care, especially those ones. She had returned to her classroom and found cards waiting on her desk, hand-drawn, poorly spelled, sincere in ways that made her throat tight. We missed you, Mrs. H. Hope everything is okay. Art class is boring without you. Elena had saved every one of them, had tucked them into a folder that she kept in her desk drawer. Evidence that she had mattered to someone, that her work had meant something, that teaching beauty to ungrateful teenagers was not a waste of time, no matter what Derek thought. The restoration of the cabin took 3 months. Elena hired local contractors who knew mountain construction. Men who had grown up building in these altitudes, who understood that old structures had stories to tell and deserved to be preserved rather than replaced. Jim Hawthorne was the lead contractor, 62 years old with hands that had built half the cabins in the county. He had taken one look at Sarah's work and shaken his head in admiration. Whoever built this knew what they were doing. The joinery is tight. The foundation is solid granite blocks fitted without mortar. I have seen professional crews do worse work with modern tools. A woman built it in 18 cents alone. Jim had stared at the cabin with new eyes after that, had touched the logs with something like reverence. Then we will honor her work. No shortcuts, no modern nonsense. We will restore it the way she would have wanted. They reinforced the foundation with techniques that matched the original construction, replaced the rotted porch boards with wood that matched the original as closely as possible, sourced from fallen trees on the property itself, fixed the sagging roof without changing its character, using wooden pegs instead of nails, where Sarah had used wooden pegs, installed new windows that looked like the old ones but actually kept out the cold and the rain. The work was slow, expensive, painstaking. But when it was done, the cabin looked like it had looked in 18 cents, except now it would stand for another 150 years. The trapdoor remained. The mine entrance received proper safety measures. Reinforced ladder rungs made from the same kind of wood Sarah had used. Emergency lighting powered by a small solar panel hidden on the roof. A ventilation system that would prevent the buildup of dangerous gases without being visible from inside. But the mine itself stayed closed. The silver stayed in the ground. $30 million worth of wealth that Elena could have extracted at any time. locked away by nothing but her word and her grandmother's trust in the promise of a woman who had died over a century ago. The sacred chamber was different. Thomas Running Bear coordinated the retrieval with the same care that archaeologists bring to excavating pharaohs' tombs. Each artifact was photographed in place from multiple angles, documented with detailed descriptions written in both English and Ute, cataloged according to tribal protocols that had been developed over decades of recovering lost heritage. Then each piece was carefully wrapped in archival materials and transported to the Tribal Cultural Center, where it would be preserved and studied and eventually displayed for new generations to learn from. The pottery came first. Pieces that had been made by hands that had been still for over a century, geometric patterns that told stories in a visual language that had nearly been lost, colors that had faded but still held meaning for those who knew how to read them. Then the baskets, woven so tightly that some still held water. Patterns passed from mother to daughter for generations before the schools came and tried to erase everything. Then the personal items, beaded work, stone tools, the small objects that had been precious to specific people whose names had been lost but whose prayers still echoed in the stone. The process took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of tribal members coming and going from the property. 6 weeks of elders who wept when they saw objects their grandparents had described but never hoped to see again. 6 weeks of prayers spoken in a language that had nearly been erased from the earth but had survived in the memories of people who refused to forget. Elena watched it all, participated when asked, stepped back when appropriate, learned to be present without being intrusive, learned to offer help without imposing her own understanding of what help should look like. This was not her moment. This was the culmination of something that had started long before she was born and would continue long after she was gone. She was a link in a chain, not the chain itself. A chapter in a story, not the whole book. On the last day of the retrieval, Joseph Whitehorse approached her outside the cabin. He was 73 years old, his face carved by decades of sun and wind, his eyes holding the weight of history. Sarah Blackwood saved something precious. Your grandmother protected it for 70 years, and you returned it when you could have profited instead. He reached into his pocket and withdrew something small, a beaded bracelet, simple in design but obviously old. This belonged to Gray Eagle's wife. She left it in the sacred chamber when she prayed for her husband's safe return from a hunting trip. That was over 160 years ago. He held it out to Elena. The tribe wants you to have it as a symbol of the bond between our peoples, between Gray Eagle and Sarah, between your grandmother and our elders, between you and those who come after. Elena took the bracelet with trembling hands. The beads were cool against her skin, smooth from years of handling, a tangible connection to a woman she would never meet, but whose prayers had somehow echoed forward through time. I do not deserve this. You kept a promise when breaking it would have cost you nothing. That makes you worthy. Joseph placed his weathered hand on Elena's shoulder. Gray Eagle told Sarah that a daughter of her daughters would come when the time was right. He was describing you. You were born for this moment. Everything that happened to you, the divorce, the homelessness, the betrayal by your family, all of it was shaping you, making you strong enough to do what had to be done. He squeezed her shoulder once, then released it. You have honored our ancestors. We will not forget. The dedication ceremony happened on the 3rd Saturday of September. Elena had chosen the date because the aspens would be turning, because the mountain would be dressed in gold and green, and the light would be perfect for remembering. 75 people gathered in the clearing outside the cabin, tribal members in traditional dress. Eleanor Hayes, with her geological equipment packed away for once, simply present as a witness. Ruth Campbell, who had closed her store for the day. Samuel Brooks, who had made the legal victory possible. Local historians who understood the significance of what was being commemorated. And Derek. He had arrived alone. No Tesla this time. He had rented a Jeep in Denver, something that could handle the mountain roads without complaint. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, clothes that looked borrowed from someone else's life. Elena had seen him park at the edge of the clearing, had watched him hesitate before getting out, had noticed how he stood apart from the other guests, uncertain of his welcome, unsure of where he belonged. Sophie had noticed too. Uncle Derek came. Her voice was carefully neutral. She had not forgotten the threats, the photographs, the way Derek had laughed at the will reading, the way he had tried to take everything from them. He did. Should I go talk to him? Elena had considered the question, considered what kind of example she wanted to set. considered what forgiveness looked like when the wounds were still fresh. That is up to you, baby. But if you do, remember that people can change. It does not mean we forget what they did. It does not mean we pretend it did not happen. But it means we leave the door open, just a crack, in case they want to walk through it. Sophie had thought about this for a long moment. Then she had walked across the clearing to where Derek stood alone. Elena could not hear what they said, could only watch her daughter stand with her uncle, two figures against the golden aspens, having a conversation that would shape something. What that something was, Elena could not know, but she knew it mattered. After a few minutes, Sophie took Derek's hand and led him toward the front of the gathering, led him to stand with family. The bronze plaque had been mounted near the cabin entrance. Elena had agonized over the words, wanting them to capture something true without being sentimental, wanting them to honor the past without diminishing the present. In the end, she had kept it simple. Sarah Blackwood Heritage Site, in honor of Sarah Blackwood, 1845 to 1918, who built with her hands and kept her word. Margaret Hartwell, 1930 to 24, who protected what was not hers to claim. Elena Hartwell, who chose honor over wealth. Your word is your wealth. Everything else is just metal in the ground. Protected by covenant, preserved across generations. Thomas Running Bear spoke first. His voice carried across the clearing with the authority of someone who had spent decades fighting for things that mattered. 3 generations of women have taught us that stewardship matters more than ownership. That promises kept across time and culture and circumstance are the foundation of everything good in this world. Sarah Blackwood was born between worlds, rejected by both. She could have been bitter, could have taken what she found in this mountain and used it to buy acceptance, to force her way into communities that had shut her out. Instead, she made a promise to a man who showed her kindness, and she kept that promise for 50 years, alone, in secret, with no one to praise her or blame her or even know what she was doing. That is integrity, real integrity, the kind that does not need witnesses or applause, the kind that simply does what is right because right is what it does. He paused, letting the words settle. Margaret Hartwell inherited that promise and kept it for 70 more years. She could have sold what Sarah found, could have become wealthy beyond imagination. Instead, she became wealthy in a different way, in the trust of her ancestors, in the knowledge that she was worthy of the responsibility she carried. And now Elena Hartwell has proven herself worthy of the same trust. She was offered $30 million. She turned it down. Not because she did not need money, she was homeless when she made that choice, but because some things matter more than comfort. Some promises matter more than profit. Thomas looked at Elena with eyes that held gratitude and respect, and something like wonder. The artifacts Sarah protected have come home. After 158 years, they have come home. Because one woman offered everything, chose to keep her word instead. That is the story we will tell our children. That is the story we will tell their children. That is the story that will last long after the silver in that mountain has turned to dust. Elena spoke next. She had not prepared remarks, had not written anything down. She trusted that the right words would come when she needed them. I inherited this property when I was homeless, living in my car with my daughter. My brother and sister laughed at me because they thought wealth was measured in dollars. But Sarah taught me different. Maggie trusted me with that lesson. Wealth is keeping your word when it costs everything. Wealth is doing right when wrong is easier. Wealth is being someone your children can look up to, not because of what you have, but because of who you are. She paused, feeling the weight of the moment. There is $30 million in silver under this mountain. I could take it. No one would stop me. No one would blame me. After everything I have been through, I would be justified in taking every cent and building a life of comfort. But I will not. Not because I am better than anyone else. Not because I do not want nice things, but because Sarah made a promise. Maggie kept that promise, and I will not be the one who breaks it. Sophie will inherit this property someday, and she will inherit the choice. Take the silver or keep the promise. She will make her own decision, but she will make it knowing what her mother chose, what her grandmother chose, what 5 generations of women chose when they stood where she stands. Elena looked at her daughter standing between Derek and the tribal elders, a child straddling worlds just like Sarah had straddled worlds so long ago. Your word is your wealth. Everything else is just metal in the ground. That is what I believe. That is what I will teach Sophie. That is what I hope she will teach her children. Some things are worth more than money. Some promises are worth more than comfort. And some mountains keep their secrets forever, for those who know how to listen. Sophie spoke last. She had not been scheduled to speak, had not told Elena she wanted to, but when the moment came, she stepped forward with a certainty that made her seem older than her 9 years. My mom and I were homeless for 7 months. We slept in our car. We ate granola bars for dinner. We showered at the gym and pretended we were there to exercise. I learned a lot of things during those 7 months. I learned how to sleep without moving, so security guards would not notice us. I learned how to use the Walmart bathroom without looking like I lived in the parking lot. I learned how to not ask for seconds, even when I was still hungry. But the most important thing I learned was about promises. Sophie's voice was steady, strong, the voice of someone who had been tested and had not broken. My mom promised she would take care of me. She kept that promise every single day, even when we had nothing, even when she was scared, even when Uncle Derek and Aunt Caroline tried to take me away from her. Great-great-grandmother Era promised to protect sacred things. She kept that promise for 50 years. Grandma Maggie kept it for 70 more years. Now my mom is keeping it. Sophie looked at the gathered crowd with eyes that had seen too much but still held hope. Someday I will have kids, and I will tell them this story about a woman named Sarah who built a cabin with her own hands and hid a secret in the mountain. About a woman named Maggie who protected that secret her whole life. About my mom, who chose to keep a promise when breaking it would have made us rich. I will tell them that keeping your word is more important than being comfortable, that some things matter more than money, that we are a family that keeps promises no matter what. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried across the clearing like a bell. Your word is your wealth. Everything else is just metal in the ground. The ceremony ended with tribal elders singing prayers in Ute, their voices rising toward the mountain that had kept secrets for over a century and a half. The sound was haunting and beautiful and filled with something that transcended language or culture or time. Elena stood among the gathered witnesses and felt the weight of the moment settle into her bones. This was what Maggie had prepared her for. This was what Sarah had started and Rose had continued, and Maggie had protected and Elena had finally completed. A promise kept, a covenant honored, a family defined not by wealth or success, but by the simple, stubborn refusal to break their word. After the ceremony, as guests mingled and shared food that the tribal members had prepared, Derek approached Elena. He looked different than he had at the will reading, smaller somehow, more human. The armor of arrogance and entitlement had cracked, and something vulnerable showed through the gaps. His suit was gone. His expensive watch was gone. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt that looked borrowed, and he held a cup of coffee in both hands like he needed something to do with them. I have been thinking about what Grandma said in that video, about character, about being tested. His voice was quiet, uncertain. The voice of someone picking their way through unfamiliar territory. The voice of someone who had spent 42 years believing one thing about himself and was now confronting the possibility that he had been wrong. I built a company worth $50 million, made partner at 32, put more zeros in my bank account than most people can imagine, won awards, made magazine covers, had people tell me I was a genius every day of my life. He took a sip of coffee. His hands were shaking slightly. But I have never been tested, not really. Not the way you were tested when Nathan left. Not the way you were tested when you had to choose between the silver and the promise. Not the way you were tested when you had to keep Sophie safe with nothing but a car and $23. He looked at the cabin, at the plaque, at the mountain holding its secrets. I do not know if I would have made the same choice you made. I do not know if I have that kind of strength. I would like to think I do, but I have never had to find out. Elena did not know what to say, did not know if there was anything to say. This was not the Derek she had known her whole life. This was someone else, someone new, or maybe someone old, someone who had been buried under decades of success and ambition, finally finding his way to the surface. So she waited, let him talk, let him work through whatever he needed to work through. I am not asking for forgiveness. Derek's voice cracked slightly. I know I do not deserve it. I tracked you like an animal. I threatened to take Sophie. I laughed at you when you had nothing and I had everything. I stood in that lawyer's office and watched them give you $5, and I thought it was hilarious. He met her eyes and she saw something there that she had never seen before. Genuine remorse, Genuine uncertainty. The beginning of something that might, with time and effort, become genuine change. I just want you to know that I understand now. What Grandma saw in you, why she trusted you with this. You are stronger than me, better than me. And I spent my whole life pretending it was the other way around. Spent my whole life measuring worth by bank accounts and job titles and telling myself that your choices were failures and mine were successes. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Grandma saw through all of that. She always did, and I was too arrogant to notice. Elena thought about all the things she could say, the accusations she could level, the wounds she could reopen, the justice she could demand. Instead, she said something else. Sophie's birthday is October 15th, 2 o'clock, no expensive gifts, just show up, be present. That is all any of us ever wanted from you, Derek. Not your money, not your success, just you, being there when it mattered. Derek nodded slowly, his eyes were wet. I will be there. He turned and walked toward his rental Jeep. Stopped. Turned back. The Apple Watch. He held up his wrist, bare now except for a faded tan line where the watch used to sit. I got rid of it. Grandma was right. I chose wrong 20 years ago when she offered me Sarah's pocket watch, and I wanted something newer. Something more impressive. I have been choosing wrong ever since. He got in the Jeep and drove away. Elena watched until the vehicle disappeared into the trees, then turned back to the celebration. Carolyn had not come, had not responded to the invitation, had sent a single text message 2 days before the ceremony. Congratulations on your victory. Do not expect me to pretend this is anything but a mistake. That was all. No explanation, no recrimination, just cold clinical dismissal from someone who would never understand what had happened on this mountain and why it mattered. Elena had not replied. Some doors could not be opened no matter how wide you pushed. Some people could not be reached no matter how far you stretched. Caroline had chosen her path, and Elena had chosen hers, and the distance between them would only grow with time. That was not a tragedy. That was just life. You could not save everyone, could not reach everyone, could not make everyone understand. All you could do was to save yourself. Reach the people who wanted to be reached, understand what mattered, and let go of what did not. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in colors that photographers spent lifetimes trying to capture. Gold and pink and purple, and shades that had no names in any language Elena knew. The guests departed slowly, reluctantly, as if leaving meant the magic would end. Cars and trucks bounced down the rutted road until only Elena and Sophie and Eleanor remained. Eleanor hugged them both before climbing into her battered pickup. Maggie would be proud. All of them would be proud. Sarah and Rose and Maggie and everyone who came before. You kept the faith. She drove away, taillights disappearing into the darkness, leaving mother and daughter alone on the mountain. They sat on the restored porch and watched the stars emerge, one by one at first, then in clusters, then in uncountable multitudes until the entire sky blazed with light that city dwellers never saw. The Milky Way stretched overhead like a river of light. Constellations that had guided travelers for millennia wheeled slowly across the heavens. The universe displayed its vastness with casual indifference to human concerns. Elena pulled Sarah's pocket watch from her jacket pocket. Gold, heavy, ornate, still ticking after 158 years. She held it to her ear and listened to the steady rhythm. Tick, 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 the heartbeat of time itself, connecting her to Sarah, who had wound this watch in this very spot over a century ago, connecting her to Maggie, who had carried it for 70 years, connecting her to Grey Eagle, who had given it as a gift to seal a promise. Time reveals all truths. The inscription on the back, words that had proven themselves over and over again. Time had revealed that Derek's success was hollow, that Caroline's achievements were empty, that Elena's homeless months had been the crucible that proved her worthy of trust that spanned 5 generations. Time had revealed that some things mattered more than money, that some promises were stronger than circumstance, that some families were defined not by blood, but by the stubborn refusal to break their word. Sophie leaned against her mother's shoulder. Mom, yeah, baby? What happens to the silver? Does it just stay there forever? Elena considered the question, considered what kind of answer Sophie needed, what kind of truth would serve her as she grew. It stays there until someone decides otherwise. Maybe you when you inherit this place, maybe your children, or their children. Each generation gets to choose. Sophie was quiet for a moment. But what if one of them chooses to take it? Does that mean we failed? Elena put her arm around her daughter and pulled her close. No, it means they made their choice, like I made mine, like Grandma Maggie made hers, like Sarah made hers. We cannot control what happens after we are gone. We can only control what we do now, in this moment, with the choices in front of us. I chose to keep the promise. You will make your own choice someday, and whatever you choose, I will be proud of you. Because I know you will think about it. I know you will understand what is at stake. I know you will not make the decision lightly. Sophie nestled closer. I think I would keep it in the ground. Like you did, like they all did. You might feel differently when you are older, when you have bills to pay and children to feed and dreams that cost money. Maybe. Sophie's voice was thoughtful, mature beyond her years in the way that children who have suffered always become mature. But I think I would remember this night. Remember the ceremony and the elders crying and the way everyone looked at you like you were something special. I would remember that being rich is not the same as being worthy. Elena felt tears forming. Let them fall without wiping them away. When did you get so wise? I watched you. Every day, for 7 months, I watched you. You kept your word to me even when you had nothing. You showed me what it looks like when someone does not break. Sophie looked up at the stars. That is worth more than $30 million. That is worth everything. They sat in silence for a long time after that, watching the stars, listening to the wind in the pines, feeling the mountain beneath them, solid and eternal, holding its secrets for future generations to discover. Somewhere below their feet, $30 million in silver waited in darkness, untouched, unspent, a fortune that most people would kill for, resting peacefully in tunnels carved by a woman who had chosen honor over wealth 158 years ago. Sarah Blackwood had died in this cabin in 1918, alone but not lonely, poor in money but rich in integrity. She had kept her promise to Gray Eagle for 51 years and had passed the burden to her granddaughter Rose, who had passed it to Maggie, who had passed it to Elena. Now Elena sat where Sarah had sat, watched the same stars Sarah had watched, held the same watch Sarah had held, and understood finally completely what her grandmother had seen in her. Not weakness, not failure, not the inability to succeed by the world's standards. Strength, the quiet kind, the unshakable kind, the kind that did not need applause or recognition or validation from anyone. The kind that simply kept its word year after year, decade after decade, generation after generation, until keeping the word became the whole point, became the treasure itself. Your word is your wealth. Sarah had written those words in her journal, probably sitting in this very spot, probably watching these same stars. Everything else is just metal in the ground. Elena understood now. The silver was not the inheritance. The silver was the test. The inheritance was the opportunity to prove that you were worth trusting, worth believing in, worth betting 158 years of promise keeping on. Maggie had looked at Derek and Caroline and seen people who would fail that test, had looked at Elena and seen someone who might pass it, had trusted that instinct enough to gamble everything. And Elena had proven her right, not by being smart or successful or wealthy, by being stubborn, by refusing to break her word even when breaking it would have cost nothing, by choosing honor when dishonor was easier and more profitable and completely justifiable. That was the real inheritance, not the property or the mine or the $30 million in silver. The knowledge that she was worthy of trust, the proof that she had earned it, the certainty that when her moment came, she had chosen right. Sophie fell asleep against her mother's shoulder as the night deepened. Elena did not move, did not want to break the spell of this moment, this perfect, fragile moment when everything she had suffered suddenly made sense. She thought about these months ahead, about Sophie's birthday in October, about Derek showing up, changed or not changed, trying or not trying, about Caroline absent, choosing separation over connection, about teaching art to teenagers who mostly did not care, and loving every minute of it, and knowing that it mattered even when the world said it did not. She thought about the years ahead, about watching Sophie grow, about being there for graduations and heartbreaks and triumphs and failures, about someday explaining all of this to grandchildren who would inherit the same choice. Take the silver or keep the promise, wealth or integrity, the easy path or the right one. She hoped they would choose right, but she knew she could not make that choice for them, could only show them what right looked like, could only live it out day by day, year by year, until it became so much a part of who she was that they could not imagine her any other way. That was all any parent could do. Plant seeds and hope they grew, set examples and hope they took, keep promises and hope the next generation understood why. The stars wheeled overhead. The mountain kept its secrets. And Elena Hartwell sat on the porch of a cabin built by a woman who had been dead for over a century, holding a daughter who represented every hope for the future, and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Peace. Not happiness exactly. Happiness was too simple a word. This was deeper, more solid, the kind of feeling that came from knowing you had been tested and had not broken, that you had been offered everything and had chosen something better, that you had kept your word when keeping it cost everything. The pocket watch ticked in her jacket. Sarah's watch, Maggie's watch, her watch now. Time reveals all truths, and the truth was this. Some things mattered more than money. Some promises were worth keeping, even when breaking them would cost nothing. Some families were defined not by wealth or success, but by the stubborn, beautiful, utterly human refusal to break their word. Elena Hartwell was part of that family now, part of a chain that stretched back 158 years and would stretch forward into a future she could not see. Sarah to Rose, Rose to Maggie, Maggie to Elena, Elena to Sophie, Sophie to whoever came next. Each link forged by choice, each connection sealed by keeping a promise when breaking it would have been easier. That was the covenant. That was the inheritance. That was the only wealth that mattered. Elena closed her eyes and listened to the ticking of the watch and the breathing of her daughter, and the wind in the pines and the ancient silence of a mountain that had witnessed it all. And she was grateful for the homelessness that had tested her, for the betrayal that had strengthened her, for the grandmother who had believed in her, for the daughter who had taught her what really mattered, for the chance to prove that her word was her wealth, for the knowledge that everything else was just metal in the ground. The stars continued their eternal dance. The watch continued its eternal ticking. And Elena Hartwell, heir to a promise made 158 years ago, sat on the porch of a cabin built by a woman she had never met and kept the faith. Just like Sarah had kept the faith. Just like Maggie had kept the faith. Just like every woman in this family had kept the faith, generation after generation, waiting for the day when the promise could finally be fulfilled. That day had come, and Elena had been worthy of it.